Yeah, we're off.
Somewhere over the rainbow, where there's a land.
Hi, Diane. Good to see ya.
That I heard of once in a lullaby. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream, they really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble smells like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you find me. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star, and I wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble smells like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you find me. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. If birds fly over the rainbow, why then why can't I? If birds fly over the rainbow, why then oh why can't
Great song. I haven't seen this video at all, Diane, but it's Chuck Missler. So I'm just praying it's a good one because it's from Chuck Missler. Should be a good video. Here it is. It goes for exactly 3 hours.
Okay. Well, we are in session 11 of our review of the book of Genesis. And it's in this particular case, we're going to be talking about Genesis chapter 6 and the days of Noah. It may surprise you to see us, out of 24 sessions, spend a full session just on chapter 6. And there's some reasons I'm doing that. There are a number of places in the Bible where there are passages that are controversial. There's several different views, and what we try to do is present the different views so you can do your own homework and come to your own conclusion. And we'll do that this time, but I want to mention something that's different about this particular chapter.
G'day, Scott. Good to see you, mate.
That 9 out of 10 pastors are confused about Genesis chapter 6. And so we're going to move into an area that's kind of technical in some respects. I used to regard it as just a peripheral, kind of interesting, but peripheral issue. But as the years have gone by, and as I've done more research, I was startled to discover that understanding this chapter is foundational to understanding most of the Old Testament, as well as prophecy. It's not just a part of the misty chapters of early Genesis. It is very foundational to understanding the rest of the Bible. So we're going to focus on this. And I want to remind you what Edmund Spencer said. We bring this up every once in a while. There is a principle which is a bar against all information. It's a proof against all argument, which cannot fail to keep man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is condemnation before investigation. What I'm going to ask you to do as we go into this session tonight is to set aside whatever you may have been taught or whatever you believe about chapter 6 and try to look at it with fresh eyes and try to hear what the text is saying. And my goal is not to sell you a particular view. My goal is to equip you, do your own homework, to do your own digging and come to your own conclusions. So the same concept is in Proverbs 18:13. He that answereth a matter before.
I can't spell it, but I was saying, I now lost track. What is it? Stirtron. I can't even say it, so Jay's gone flat. Sorry, guys.
But heareth it, you'll folly and the shame unto him. So set aside what
Stirtron, that was it.
Strange things that are going to go on in chapter 6 of Genesis. And let's try to approach it openly and with an inquiring mind. And what I used to do all the time is always have you put at the top of your notepad my trademark, Acts 17:11. And that's where Luke tells you, don't believe anything Chuck Missler tells you, but receive the word of God with all openness of mind, yet search the scriptures daily to prove where those things be so. And I use that, for 30 years I've used that as a trademark. It applies no more emphatically than it does here. So we're going to talk about the biblical view of the days of Noah. That's a phrase that Jesus used, and we want to understand what it really meant. You may recall that 4 disciples came to Jesus privately. Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, Peter's brother, came to Jesus. He happened to be sitting on the Mount of Olives, so many people call his response to their questions the Olivet Discourse. And it's recorded in three places: Matthew 24 and 25, Mark 13, and Luke 21 and 22. And we'll look at the Matthew account. Since Matthew took shorthand, he had to. He was a tax customs official. That was your job requirement. His gospel, it has most of these taken down in verbatim. But in that discussion that Jesus, in responding to their question about his second coming, he opened his discussion and he closed his discussion, two-chapter discussion, with the admonition, take heed that no man deceive you. So you want to have your guard up on this one. But when you get down to verse 37 of Matthew 24, Jesus makes an interesting remark. He says, but as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. The whole passage has to do with his second coming. And this is Matthew 24. In a couple of chapters, he's going to be crucified. And that crucifixion was not a tragedy. It was an achievement. The details of which were laid down in Genesis 3, and the entire Bible focuses on that cross. But as he's preparing his disciples for his departure and reminding them that he is coming back and talking the details about his second coming, among the things he remarks, he refers to the days of Noah. And we don't understand what he's talking about, because most of us don't have any idea. We have no idea what the days of Noah were really like. Well, it was a day of great sinfulness. Indeed it was. But if that's all there was, we better get some life jackets. Okay?
We'll say.
Okay. So what does that mean as part of the question? Well, we're going to explore. Genesis chapter 6 is preparatory to the ark and the flood and all of that. Noah. How many of you know about Noah? Have you heard of Noah before? About 80%, huh? Okay. I'm kidding, of course, but the ark and all of that will be chapter 7, 8, and 9. 7 and 8, actually, and then 9 the other. So we're going to focus, though, on chapter 6 tonight, quickly, because we need to understand that, because there are some conditions that will impact your understanding of almost everything else in the Old Testament, and thus the prophecies. So Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. Now, the first thing I want you to notice before we get in this, I want you to notice verse 1 and 2 are a single sentence. It's amazing how much confusion has been generated by splitting that single sentence into the two verses. Genesis 6, verse 1 and 2. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Well, the first thing it hits us is sons of God. What does that phrase really mean? The sons of God. You want you to notice when men began to multiply, that's men in general, no particular subset, we're just men multiplied on the face of the earth, and they had daughters. We're talking daughters in general. We're not talking about a specific group of daughters. We're born of them, that the sons of God, whoever they were, we'll come back to that, saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, they were attractive. I assume that was a general attribution. And they took them wives of all which they chose. That's kind of a strange phrase, by the way. In the Hebrew especially, it implies that the wives didn't have much choice about it. They took them wives of all which they chose. And so now, what about this word, sons of God? In the Hebrew, it's Bnei Ha-Elohim, Ha-Elohim, sons of God. But it's a phrase. To understand what it means, we need to examine the rest of the Bible. And you'll discover something interesting. That phrase is used of a direct creation of God. Okay, what did that include? Adam was a son of God. He was a direct creation of God. He fell, became sinful. You and I, as natural born sons and daughters, are sons and daughters of Adam. In the natural, we have a genetic defect. It's called sin. Therefore we die. Well, babies are innocent. No, they die also. See, even though they may be given certain allowances by God until they get the age of accountability, they also have a genetic defect called sin. We're sons of Adam, not sons of God. The term son of God in the scripture is always used of a direct creation of God. That includes Adam and it includes the angels. In fact, that particular phrase, if you search the entire Old Testament in the Hebrew, it's always used of angels. There are some similar passages used slightly differently, but that particular term we maintain is a technical term referring to angels. Now, I might mention something so you don't get confused. When you get to the Gospel of John, 1 John 11 and 12, speaking of Jesus Christ, he came unto his own, Israel, but his own received him not. But as many as did receive him, to them gave he the power to be what? Become the sons of God. And have life through his name. So the point is, that's why, and that gets explained in John chapter 1. John 3, he explains it. There is a new birth involved. That's not a figure of speech. There's actually a creative event that takes place when you receive Jesus Christ. That's why it's called a new birth. And that's why you are a new creature. You are then a direct creation of God, if you're a believer. And those aren't just idioms of spiritual philosophy or something. They are very, very real events. And if it happens, your life will be changed after that. It'll bear fruit. If there's no fruit, then you've got a problem. But let's move on. So the sons of God refer to angels. Well, this leads then to a pretty weird set of views about this chapter. They are views that are not taught in most seminaries. I remember when we published some of our books and stuff, I got calls from vice presidents of major publishing companies that were angry, not at me, but to realize that they'd graduated from seminary, in this particular case, and had never been even taught this view. It's not like, I'm going to show you both views in a minute, but there's two views. These are the two views, take your pick. Most people had never been taught or taken seriously the view I'm going to show you. The sons of God, B'nai Elohim. It always is used of angels in the Old Testament. In Job 3 times, Job 1:6, 2:1, and 38:7. In Luke 20 verse 36 is the equivalent emphasis. There's a book called the Book of Enoch. It's not part of the Bible. It's not regarded as an authentic source. It is named after what may have been at one time an authentic source that's been lost, but it's a collection of views. But it's a very valuable book. It emerged about the 2nd century before Christ. And what makes it valuable is not its content, because it's not inspired, but it's very useful for grammar and vocabulary, because it's Hebrew 2 centuries before Christ, and it deals with these issues. And it details this kind of thing. And so don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting the Book of Enoch is inspired literature. I am saying it's a useful reference point to understand the grammar and the vocabulary of that day. But even more so is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, called the Septuagint. 3 centuries before Christ's ministry, the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek, and we have 4 copies of them. It's called the Septuagint, a fancy word for 70. 70 scholars were gathered in the literary center of the world called Alexandria in Egypt, and spent 15 years, from 285 to 270, translating the Old Testament into Greek.
Wow.
Now, what makes that so valuable is Greek is a very precise language. Incredibly.
I never knew that it was, what did he say, 260 years before the New Testament. I never knew that.
I mean, no language has ever come along as precise as Greek. Every verb has to fit 5 conditions and so forth.
That's probably why science uses Latin, because it's so precise.
In the Septuagint translates this clearly as angels. Now, it was done by the greatest Hebrew scholars 3 centuries before Christ's birth. So I'm going to suggest that at least in some of these cases, it's very authoritative. Now,
Diane, that's a big earthquake, 7.3. Is that what it says? That's a pretty big earthquake. Yeah, 7.3. Wow.
when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. And now we get to we talked about Benai Elohim, sons of God. The daughters of men, I want you to notice what that is, Banath Adam in the Hebrew. The view that is taught by most seminaries is that, well, that really refers to the daughters of
Hi,
Cain.
Han. Good to see
And
you.
they try to create a situation that the sons of God referred to the descendants of Seth, and the daughters were of Cain, and they weren't supposed to intermarry, and that's what's involved here. I'll deal with that in more detail in a minute, but I want you to notice that's not what the text says. It's the sons of God, Benai Elohim, saw the Banath Adam, that is the daughters of Adam. So these are general girls, not the girls of a particular, of either of Cain or Abel or Seth or whatever. You with me? Okay. Now when you get down to verse 4, it says there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them. The same became the Hagibarim, the mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. There were Nephilim. That's the Hebrew word. Unfortunately, it's translated as giants in many English translations. They did happen to be giants, but that's not what the word means. The word in the Hebrew is Nephilim, and it's important to understand this word. It comes from a root meaning Nephal, the fallen ones. The verb Nephal in the Hebrew is to fall or be cast down, to fall away, or desert. If you're a deserter, or if you so forth, the verb is Nephal. Nephilim are the fallen ones. So they were fallen ones. Now, what on earth are they? Also in that verse was the Hagibarim, the mighty ones. And these Nephilim, in other words, when these angels, now these are fallen angels, these are bad guys, you'll see in a minute. When they found some way to procreate with human women, they gave birth to hybrids. They were different than either of their parents because they were part human and part not human. And these were the Nephilim. And this idea shocks many people. It's very disturbing to many people, but let's try to keep an open mind and see what the scripture says and see what implications it has in our understanding, not just of the flood of Noah, but the rest of the Old Testament. Now, again, the Septuagint takes this word, Nephilim, and treats it, translated as gigantes. Because it's gigantes, when they translated from the Septuagint to the English, they called them giants. It sounded like giants. That's not what the word means, by the way, but you can understand why they did that. They really transliterated. So they translated in most English Bibles as giants. The word comes from gigas, which means earthborn. And it's the same word that they use in Greek mythology for titans. Titans in Greek mythology were the offspring of gods, Greek gods, cohabiting with women. They were the demigods, half god, half man. Titans, Atlas, Hercules. These were in mythology these kinds of creatures. So that's what the word used for. The word genea means to breed or be of a certain kind. And the English word genes or genetics comes from the same Greek root. And there may be a linkage here that may surprise you, that we'll get into this a little bit. Well, Genesis 3 said, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So from this announcement, there's 120 years before the big event, which we'll talk about. And then verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days. That's the way it'd be. That's the way it would be in your Bible. The word is Nephilim. We're going to talk a lot about Nephilim in the earth in those days. And notice this, and also after that, these things occurred in those days, and they gave rise to the flood. But there's a phrase in here we're going to come back to later. And also after that, it didn't end with the flood. It was so universal that the flood dealt with it, but we're going to discover it wasn't limited to that. There's been some incidents since then. Anyway, and when the sons of God, the Benai Elohim, came in unto the Banath Adam, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now, when you get down to verse 9, we're going to be dealing with some other verses here in a minute, but I want to look ahead a little bit. In verse 9 of chapter 6, there is a remark about Noah that unless you're very careful, unless you have to do some exegetical homework, you'll miss the meaning of it. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Now here's that phrase again. We ran into that phrase with Enoch, didn't we? Noah walked with God. He was a just man. That doesn't mean he was sinless, but it does mean he was righteous before God because he was faithful and obedient. But there's a phrase in here that most people miss. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. Now that word perfect in the Hebrew is tamim. It always refers to a physical blemish.
Wow.
Tamim means without a blemish, sound, healthful, without spot.
And we know where he's going with this, guys. Tampered DNA. But this just backs it up really well.
Blemished, in other words. Unimpaired. Well, wait a minute. What does it mean when it says that his genealogy was unimpaired? You see, it wasn't tainted by these goings on with these fallen angels. The human race was getting contaminated. In fact, I believe it was Satan's strategy to contaminate the human race to prevent a redeemer that was promised in Genesis 3. But Noah is an exception. He may not have been the only exception, but what was distinctive with Noah and his gang is that they were untainted by these goings on of the Nephilim, of the fallen angels. Now you say, gee, this sounds pretty weird stuff, Chuck. You're saying that these angels cohabited with women and gave birth to hybrids. Well, if that's a pretty weird idea. But if it's true, it's going to be confirmed in at least 2 places elsewhere in the Bible, right? 2 or 3 witnesses the law requires. If you turn to Jude, verse 6 and 7, that's the book just before the book of Revelation, New Testament. Jude is making an argument that I'm not going to try to recreate here to take the time, but in his argument, he makes reference in verse 6 of this little book. He says, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day. So Jude here, Jude's the brother of Jesus Christ. He's writing this little short epistle. He's speaking of angels that did something wrong. They kept not their first estate, but they left their own habitation. I'll come back to that word in a minute. He hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Then he goes on to amplify this for us in verse 7. He says, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth an example, for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So here we have an allusion by Jude that these angels, which apparently went after strange flesh, which God, because of that, they are reserved in everlasting chains and under darkness. So they're given a very special treatment. Well, this left their own habitation going after strange flesh. These are angels talking about here. The word habitation, here's another technicality. You'll find, you won't find this in most textbooks, but the word in the Greek in the habitation is okaterion. It only occurs twice in the New Testament. Here in Jude, and in 2 Corinthians 5:2. What does this word okaterion mean? It means habitation, like a habit or a habitation. Well, it's used only twice in the Bible. In Jude 6, we just read, it's what these angels left. These angels left their habitation. Here it says, in a positive sense, it's speaking of the believer. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our, and the same word, okaterion, which is from heaven. When we put this together, the angels that sinned shed the place they were living in, the body they were living in order to participate in this sin with human beings. That term is the body that you and I...
Diane, can you please send that to me on Skype? There's too much to read there. I read the first chapter or 2, but I'd like to read the rest. So can you please send it to me on Skype?
Aspire to. we would use the term resurrection body. See, for in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our habit or habitation, house, which is from heaven. You and I, as believers, aspire to having that habitation, which is given to us by God. It's our immortal bodies. But that term is what these angels shed in order to participate in this mischief in Genesis 6. Let's look at another place. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. Peter makes a reference to the same thing again. He says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus, I'll come back to that word, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah. And then he goes on. So Peter does two things here. He introduces to a word Tartarus, I'll come back to, but he also links these angels that sinned with the days of Noah. See, God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down, delivered them in the chains of darkness, reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah. And he goes on to talk about Noah and the ark and all that business. Now, he uses the word Tartarus. That word does not occur anywhere else in the Bible. It's translated hell in your English Bible. But what kind of a hell is it? The word Tartarus in the Greek is widely used in Greek, not in biblical Greek, but in Greek. Tartarus is the Greek term for a dark abode of woe. In fact, it's considered the pit of darkness in the unseen world.
Wow.
In Homer's Iliad, the classic Greek thing, it is rendered as it is as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. What does that mean? I don't know, but I don't want to go there. Okay. Now, it's very possible that it might be synonymous with the abuso. That's speculation. We're not sure. We'll see. But that's another story. Now, what's interesting about this weird view that I'm sharing with you about Genesis 6, we'll discover that that same idea is embodied in the myths and legends of every culture, ancient culture on the planet Earth. We're best known as the Greek Titans. The Greek mythology speaks of these demigods that are partly terrestrial, partly celestial. They apparently rebelled against their father Uranus, and after a prolonged contest, they were defeated by Zeus and condemned into Tartarus. Again, that's what the word comes from. And by the way, it's interesting that Zeus is not the creator. I've been doing a little study of Greek mythology. I'm fascinated. You know, I always thought, well, Zeus is their name for God. Not exactly, because Zeus is still not the creator. So it's interesting. They don't reach that far in their thing. Anyway, here's pictures as Zeus is often rendered, who is the top guru here. And then you have Hercules. You all heard about Hercules. You all heard about Atlas. In the Greek mythology, these would be in the Hebrew called Nephilim. They were offspring of human mothers and Greek mythological gods as parents. Now, if you study ancient legends, you'll discover the most earliest culture, Sumer, it has these legends, Assyria, Egypt, Incas, Mayan, Gilgamesh and Babylon, Persia, Greece, of course. Most of us are familiar with the Greek versions of this mythology. India, Bolivia, South Sudan. Even the American Indians speak of the star people that came down and so forth. And I came across a fascinating reference in a book that was considered at the time very reliable, the autobiography of William Cody, commonly known as Buffalo Bill. And if you look at Buffalo Bill's autobiography, Colonel William F. Cody in 1920, there's a paragraph, I put part of it in here. He says, while we were in the sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day, and they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo, and taking the animal in one arm could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. The bone was too big, they didn't have wagons, so they didn't keep it. So he recorded it in his journal. So I don't know what to make of that, but I think it's interesting.
And you get a bit of an insight into these giants' mindset. They run along, pick a buffalo up, and rip a leg off it. That's pretty brutal. So that's showing their mindset.
You'll discover, if you study Indian lore, that the Indians were terrified of the 6-fingered people. That's why when they met a stranger, they held up the hand to prove they only had 5 fingers. This howl business is Hollywood, but the idea of greeting a stranger with your hand so you can count fingers. You'll find that recorded in the pictographs in petroglyphs in Chaca, New Mexico, among other places. Anyway, moving on. There is a book that I have a extensive library, but someone was kind enough to add this to it, by Stephen Quayle, which is an encyclopedia of giants, all relating to Genesis 6 and other subjects. And this came out in 2002. I'm just giving you a couple of snapshots. It's amazing. He has a catalog here of hundreds of giants in human history that we have records of or pictures of. Here's a couple of guys. You wouldn't want to meet them in a dark alley, would you? Here's a guy 9 foot 4 inches, Makhnoff and Chiquita. Two of these are, of course, used in shows and stuff back in the turn of the century. Here's a gal by the name of Lady Amma. She was 22 years old, 7 foot 9 inches, with 2 elder sisters. You notice this?
Yeah, but that's different, guys. I'm pretty sure these giants haven't got 6 fingers.
One of them is very.
So they're just unnaturally tall. I don't think they're actually giants from the Bible.
Very small. She ends up marrying a Chinese dwarf. These are from the late 19th century. Here's Captain Martin Van Buren and his wife, Mrs. Ann Bates. Both of them about 8 feet tall. She was actually a little taller than he was, or very close to it. He was born in Kentucky in 1847, and they, of course, were on.
Wow, he's about 4 foot wide. Look how wide he is. Wow.
Throughout Europe, but these pictures were part of the promotion and so forth. I could go on, but just to give you some, there are records of giant people, 10, 13 feet kinds of people, and skeletons, hundreds of them. It's one part of Stephen Quayle's book highlights the fact that for strange reasons, they always get covered up. You really have to do some digging to get the records and stuff. He spent 30 years pulling his encyclopedia together. But there's a genetic discovery I want to share with you. Scientists at Johns Hopkins University have discovered that there's a gene in mice which controls growth. It's called GDF8. In other words, growth differentiation factor 8. Disrupting GDF8 will result in super mice that are 2 to 3 times larger and much stronger than normal mice. And this was published in Nature, a reputable journal, in April 30th of 1997. So it's interesting to me, don't confuse hormonal growth. Some people are large because of hormones, but when they get bigger, they get weaker. We're talking about the genetic difference here, and also, I'm assuming, a genetic difference in the Nephilim. You follow me? Because the Nephilim become supermen, very large and very terrifying. And so now it's interesting, by the way, speaking of genetics here now, it's interesting, in the Bible, there's the death penalty for lying with a beast, sleeping with an animal, in the sexual sense. If a woman lies with a beast, both shall be killed, not only the beast, but the woman. That's in Leviticus 20, verses 15 and 16. Give you an example. This all deals with confusion. And one of the questions we could ponder as we drive home tonight, does the genetic transfers of human DNA into animals suggest that we are entering the period which Jesus likened to the
Yes,
days of
I
Noah?
think so.
This genetic thing is going to get more complicated, especially as we cross species lines. We're introducing confusion. We're going to open the door for diseases that we have no answer to, and so forth. And so we're entering a very nightmarish era. And that's exactly what Revelation talks about in terms of Revelation chapter 6 and so on. Well, it's interesting, as you travel the ancient world, you find these gods or super gods modeled in all the ancient writings. They have the flying god Ashur. And this guy shows up everywhere, on pyramids, on walls. As you go through Egypt, he's on all the thresholds. As you go up there, you see it right in the middle of these winged things. And of course, some people feel that these may be allusions to flying saucers and what have you. And so we won't get into that here. We did publish a book called Alien Encounters, which deals with this and explores the possibility that it may have some relationship to the increasing occurrence of flying UFOs and so on. But there is a different view. The view I'm going to show you now is the way this material is classically taught in most seminaries. And as a result, most pastors, I'll show you some exciting exceptions, but I'm talking about conservative pastors. I'm talking about the general run-of-the-mill pastors. They talk about Genesis 6 in terms of what's called the line of Seth. And the view is that the sons of God, that phrase refers to Seth, the leadership of Seth. Seth, they paint this picture. Abel's been killed by Cain, right? Then there comes Seth. Well, Cain's the bad guy, Seth's the good guy. Is the fabric they try to create. And the sons of God is a phrase they argue that refers to the Sethite leadership. By the way, there's not a scrap of biblical reference to supports this. This is just the way it's taught. The daughters of Adam really means the daughters of Cain. And the big mistake that was made, presumably, is that the Sethite leadership commingled with the daughters of Cain, and that was supposed to be a no-no. And there's some problems with that. The sin in this was a failure to maintain separation. There's a problem with this because separation isn't called for until chapter 11. They weren't told to keep separate, by the way. So this is all very contrived. But even when you go through this, the other question is, well, then, fine, if you got believers and unbelievers marrying, who are these Nephilim? When a believer and an unbeliever get married and have children, the children can grow up to be monsters, but they're not monstrous. They're not genetically distinctive. You with me? You see the difference? These Nephilim are genetically distinctive. And this whole idea of the line of Seth emerged in the 5th century. Celsus and Julian the Apostate used the traditional belief of the angel view of Genesis 6 to attack Christianity because it's a weird idea. A lot of people rebel at this idea. Angels having, it's just unpleasant. So a guy named Julius Africanus resorted to the Sethite theory as a more comfortable way with dealing with the text. He contrived this idea. Well, what it really means is this, doesn't mean what it says. It means that it's really referring to such and so. And of course, then Cyril of Alexandria used it to repudiate the Orthodox position because in leaning on Africanus. But the real mistake came when Augustine embraced the Sethite view, and because he did, and because of his stature, it became the Orthodox view. The lines of Seth is the view that's, even to this day, still taught about this passage. And thus it became part of the Catholic Church, and it prevailed through the Middle Ages. And most Protestant denominations that derived from the Reformation kept. They dragged this baggage along without re-examining it. And now, and so it's commonly taught today. When I'm teaching you here, you're going to have to do some digging to even come across what's called the angel view of Genesis 6. But the text itself, the sons of God is never used of believers in the Old Testament. That's what the Sethite view would require. Seth was not God. Cain was not Adam. These were daughters of Adam, not daughters of Cain, right? So forth. And there's no mention of daughters of Elohim. There's sons of God, but there aren't daughters. Are there no daughters of Elohim? What's the point? And there's also some grammatical problems with that I won't bore you with. That gets technical, so we'll move on. And the lines were separated in Genesis 11. That's when that was imposed upon Isaac, not for Ishmael or anybody else, just on Isaac. By the way, if the Sethites were the good guys, right? That's the theory of the Seth view. Why did they drown in the flood? You see, all flesh was corrupted according to Genesis 6, verse 12. So this idea of the Sethite view, as it's called, if you start examining it from a textual basis, falls apart. Makes no sense. Now, the inferred godliness of Seth is suspect because who was his son? Remember, see, only Enoch and Noah's 8 were spared. Noah and his 3 sons, that's 4 people, and their 4 wives. 8 people in that ark. Enoch's pulled out ahead of time. Those 8 are miraculously preserved in the ark. Well, where are the Sethites if they're such good guys? Remember, the Nephilim took wives as they chose. And why did the Sethites perish in the flood? And by the way, something else you may recall from last session, Enosh, which was Seth's son, is the guy that initiated the defiance of God. He's the first apostate. That last verse in chapter 4 is mistranslated.
Well, I didn't know we knew that, who was the first apostate. I didn't know we knew that. Geez, a good teacher.
In the days of Enosh, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. That's mistranslated. They began to defy, call upon idols and so forth. Very important translation issue we talked about last time. Men began to profane the name of the Lord, according to Genesis 4:26. That's the Targum of Angelos, which is in the Jewish community regarded as the translation. The Targum of Jonathan, Kimchi, Rasher, and the other rabbinical scholars all agree. Jerome agrees. Maimonides, which is probably the most venerated of the Hebrew sages of the 12th century, in his commentary on Mishnah. The point is, the ancient Hebrew sages understood the angel view. That's the main point I'm getting here. And daughters of Cain is the concept. There's not a subset of the daughters of Adam. Cainites were not necessarily godless. Remember, Cain, yes, he murdered his brother. But remember how that chapter ends with his genealogy. He names his son with the name of God in it. He was a repentant believer. Yes, he did murder, and yes, he's suffering for it. But his children were God-fearing, apparently, at least some of them. And the other question about the daughters of Seth that they don't have an answer for, were the daughters of Seth so unattractive? Why are the Sethite leadership going after daughters of Cain? What's wrong with daughters of Seth? Are they ugly or what's wrong? Anyway, but the unnatural offspring is the final nail in the coffin of the Sethite thing, the supernatural offering. The text implies that the offering, the Nephilim, were the mighty men, the Hagabarim. And to give you an example, one is Goliath. He was a descendant of Anak. Anak was one of the Nephilim. And of course, this whole issue, no chromosomes among the Sethites. There were no women of renown, men of renown, right? No women of renown. And so and then the other question is, what made Noah's genealogy so distinctive that it gets a mention in verse 9? Because it was unblemished. These others were blemished. Now, the New Testament, as I point out, confirms this 3 times. In Jude 6 and 7, we looked at that. 1 Peter 3, 19 and 20, and 2 Peter 2, verses 4 and 5. So we went through those. Now, the angel view before Christ is all through the traditional rabbinical literature. It's in the book of Enoch, as I mentioned before. It's the testimony of the 12 patriarchs. It's in Josephus. Josephus talks. He takes for granted the angel view in his writings, and the Septuagint, as I mentioned. So, if you look at the record that we would regard as useful, it clearly it knows no other view than really the angel view. The church fathers in the early church, Philo of Alexandria, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Athenagoras, Tertullian, Lactantius, and Ambrose is missing. It should be Ambrose, and Julian. Let's talk about modern day. If you read the writings of G.H. Pember, M.R.D. Hahn, C.H. McIntosh,
Yay, Macintosh!
Are the authoritative commentaries in the Old Testament in most seminary libraries. Gaebelein, Arthur W. Pink, Donald Gray Barnhouse, Henry Morris down in San Diego, Merrill Unger, expert on demonology, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, one of the greatest contemporary Jewish scholars who knows his Bible, and Hal Lindsey, Chuck Smith. I had a guy that didn't really buy this, a good friend of mine, is a guy by the name of Tim LaHaye. And Tim and I used to have some discussions, and he wouldn't fight me on it. He just couldn't quite. I got a letter from him just a couple of days ago. The subject of the letter was somebody who's congratulating us on the verdict that we got in the trial. But he also in a letter says, "Chuck, you finally convinced me," because he's apparently, for some other reasons, he's doing some research and some writing. And he's got all the tapes. He's gone through them 3 times, and he finally in his letter you finally convinced me on the angels of Genesis 6. And so I could add his name here too, I suppose. But anyway, so the Sethite view is shattered by the text itself, by the inferred separation, by the inferred godliness of Sethites, the inferred Cainite subset of the Adamites, the unnatural offspring called Nephilim, New Testament confirmations. But here is the real shocker to me. Up till now, that was my view. But as I've been doing some homework in recent years, I also realized you will not understand what happened after the flood and most of the prophecies through the Old Testament unless you understand this background. If you miss this, so I always felt, well, okay, there's 2 different views. I hold this one, they hold that one. Who cares? Let's go on. I discovered, no, this turns out to be the important foundation to understand the rest of the Old Testament. Because you're going to run into, in the Old Testament, a term called the Rephaim. The word Repha means dead. It also means, it can mean ghost or spirit, but it's often the Rephaim are the dead ones. But see, they're the walking dead, you'll discover. In Genesis 6:4, when we talked about the Nephilim, it says, and also after that, after the flood, we run into people called the Rephaim. Now, one of the questions that lurks behind this study will be, who built the ancient monuments? You know, the world is littered with monuments that defy explanation, not just the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge, There are palaces and things and temples in which the rocks are the size of boxcars, and they come from hundreds of miles away. And there's all kinds of theories, but the truth is no one really knows how these things were built. And this doesn't explain it, but it begins to, there's a hint that see, the Great Pyramid of Giza is one, the Stonehenge in Britain. And there's a circle of what's known as a circle of Rephaim up in the Golan Heights. Nan and I were up there once. We got a 4x4, and we went up there. And this is an aerial. You can't tell this from the ground. When you're in the air, you realize it's a Stonehenge-type structure. It's called the Gilgal Rephaim. It's up in the Golan Heights, up in near Bashan. We're going to talk more about that as we go. There are 5 circles that involve 20-ton stones. The diameter is about 155 meters. It's dated to about 3000 BC. It's built on a flat plateau. It's only visible. You can only tell its architecture when we're getting above it. And it's about 10 miles from Ashtaroth, Karnaim. And it's in Genesis, Joshua. We won't spend a lot of time on that here. There's some other ruins. These have never been excavated, by the way, because they're up there up in the Golan, where it's the tension. When we take some pictures, there were shells dropping about 1,000 yards away. Training stuff, but still. After the flood, it says also after that, we discover, you'll be introduced in Genesis 14, there's at least 4 tribes, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Horim, and the Zamzumim, that God instructs Joshua to wipe out every man, woman, and child of those certain tribes. When you read that in the Old Testament, as a New Testament reader, it's hard to relate to that, because they are instructed not to compromise, to wipe out every man, woman, child. And you need to understand, you want to understand that, but you realize there's a gene pool problem. When we get to Genesis 15, God is going to give Abraham, Genesis 12, 15, and 17, deals with God's covenant with Abraham, where he commits the land to Abraham. And he tells Abraham what's going to happen. You're going to go away, and your descendants will come back here after 400 years. He goes to that prophecy. Well, when God tells Abraham that, Satan suddenly knows that he's got 4 centuries to lay down a minefield. And so the mischief that led to the flood of Noah, that was worldwide, which was taken care of by the flood, that same mischief apparently was indulged in the land of Canaan to provide these giants to prevent Israel from taking its possession. Satan has always tried to oppose God's plan, and he gave that land to Israel. So in those days, he had these giants. Today, he's got the PLO and the UN. But let's move on. In Numbers 13, you remember when Moses sent the 12 spies out? And Joshua and Caleb back and said, let's go get them. God's with us. But the other 10 were terrified. They said, we are as grasshoppers in their sight. Why? Verse 33 of Numbers 13, there were Nephilim in the land. That actual Hebrew word is used there. And Arba, Anak, and his 7 sons were known as the sons of Anak, the Anakim. They were encountered in Canaan. Their descendants, you will remember, one had a group of brothers. His name was Goliath, right? And so on. So these guys are 10, 13 feet tall. These are not just overgrown. These aren't basketball guys. These are different breed altogether. There was a king, Og, the king of Bashan. Up in the Golan Heights, the biblical area is called Bashan. And Og, the king of Bashan, is known in Deuteronomy 3 and Joshua 12 and elsewhere as the king of the giants. He was the king of these gigantic races that were derivative from some kind of undisclosed mischief by these angels again, Satan's emissaries. And Goliath and his 4 brothers. See, when you read all about David, he goes across, as a kid, he's going to take on Goliath. Notice when he stops at that brook, he picks up 5 stones. How many did he need for Goliath? 1. What, the other 4, their lack of faith? No. He was ready for all of them. You go inside this kid. You can study the Bible from cover to cover in terms of Satan's strategy to try to thwart the plan of God. As God reveals that there's going to be a Redeemer, the seed of the woman, Satan knew he had to deal with the human race. The corruption of Adam's line was his first shot, apparently. Well, maybe Cain and Abel was part of it, but by corrupting the firstborn there. Abraham's seed, when God starts to tell Abraham that calls Abraham, tells the Redeemer is going to come from his seed, then Abraham allows Satan to focus his attack now, not on everybody, just on Abraham. The famine in Genesis 50 and others. When you get to Exodus, the destruction of the male line by Pharaoh, it's all part of Satan's provocation. Even after Pharaoh lets him go on Passover, he changes his mind, goes after him, right? To what? To wipe them out. Pharaoh's pursuit, Exodus 14. And then, of course, the whole population of Canaan, to prevent them from getting in there, is part of what we're going to be dealing with here. When God finally reveals that it's going to be not just through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and through the tribe of Judah, even every time God does it, allows Satan to focus. But when he reveals that it's going to be out of the house of David, that in 2 Samuel 7, that allows Satan to focus his attacks on the house of David. And in the royal line, again and again and again, we find the royal kids, the heirs to the throne, are killed. There's an attempt to wipe out all the heirs, except always there's a servant that hides a baby. There's all kinds of these, all through there are these intrigues. The Arabians slew all but Azariah, who was hidden. Athaliah, she ends up killing everybody, but Joash escapes. Hezekiah is assaulted in Isaiah 36 and 38. Remember, when you get to the Persian Empire, Haman is trying to wipe out the entire Jewish race. Why? Well, it's prejudice. No, it's something more deeper than not just that simple. It's an attempt to thwart the plan of God. And you wonder, why is Satan still at it today? Because there's a prerequisite condition for the second coming of Christ. That's for Israel to repent and to ask him to return. And they will. But it'll take the tribulation to drive them to it. In the New Testament, Joseph fears when Mary's pregnant. That was punishable by death. He fears for her. Matthew 1st. Herod's attempt to kill the babes at Bethlehem, celebrate every Christmas that comes up. That's Satan's attempt to thwart the plan of God. At Nazareth, when Jesus opens his ministry in Luke 4, they try to throw him off a cliff. Then there's storms at sea, and by the way, there's two of them, not just one. In Mark 4 and Luke 8, you'll discover if you study those storms, they were not, in my opinion, natural storms. Why? Because there were sailors aboard that are familiar with those waters that knew about storms, and they were terrified. That tells me something else is going on. They were supernaturally induced, I believe. And that's why Jesus rebukes the storm. Interesting. Check the words. And of course, the ultimate strategy was the cross. And all of this is summarized for you in Revelation 12. And Revelation's got this dramatic book, but there's a chapter set aside, chapter 12, where it reviews from the seed of the woman until the rapture. In fact, beyond the rapture. So Satan's still at it, and he's not through. What does the Golan Heights, Hebron, and the Gaza Strip have in common? You read those in the news lately? They were the areas that Joshua failed to exterminate the Rephaim in Joshua 15 and so forth. If you do a study of the book of Judges, the strongholds that failed to defeat Israel completely in the book of Judges are the parts that are colored on the map. Those are the territories that to this day are still remaining in dispute. And where's their capital? In Jericho, Bet Yaral, the house of the moon god. Interesting, isn't it? Isn't that fascinating? I think it's interesting. Then tell me demons are not territorial. There is a very, very strange verse in Psalm 22. Always read Psalm 22. It sounds as if it was dictated first person singular by Jesus as he hung on the cross. It opens up with, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And it closes with, it's done, it's finished. And but in the middle, and we always look at that with great, it's incredible as you go through that. But right in the middle of it, there's a strange verse in verse 12. Jesus apparently saying, many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. Now, Bashan is what we call the Golan Heights, and it was well known as cattle raising country. Bulls of Bashan was an idiom. It may be that's what he means. A bunch of cattle down there? I don't think so. I suspect, don't know this, I'm just guessing here, but I suspect this is a demonic phrase.
Yeah,
the bulls of Bashan is referring to something supernatural. There's another issue that surprises me that more experts, people who really specialize in this field, have not seen the discernment. And that's the distinction between fallen angels and demons. All through the Bible we find fallen angels. We just talked a lot about them so far today. When you get the New Testament, you run into these strange things that we generally call demons. Are they equivalent or are they distinctive? There are experts, Merrill Unger being one of them, that are really, that their world is demonology, that don't make the distinction I'm going to suggest to you here, so you have to decide for yourself. The nature of angels. What do we know about angels? We'll go through the Bible. We discover
Sons of
they always
God.
appear in human form. They never look like anything. They don't look like lizards or elephants. They normally look like they're in human form. It's Sodom and Gomorrah. They're always in pairs too, usually, by the way. Sodom and Gomorrah, remember? At the resurrection, they were there, a couple of them. At the ascension, there's a couple of them, right? Always look like men, right? They spoke so you could understand them. They took men by the hand. They ate meals with them, right? Paul even admonishes you in his New Testament epistles in terms of hospitality. Many of you have entertained angels unawares. That's Paul's perception there, okay? They are capable of direct physical combat. The Passover in Egypt was accomplished by an angel doing the Lord's bidding. Angel of death is referred to in simplicity. One night after dinner, one angel slaughters 185,000 Syrian soldiers. I don't know how many soldiers were there. It wouldn't surprise me. There were twice that many if they slit every other throat. That's what the Turks used to do, just to scare everybody to death. You wake up in the morning, find every other, that's demoralizing to a group. Because the word gets around. But anyway, they slaughtered 185,000. You don't mess with angels. By the way, Jesus said they don't marry. That causes a lot of confusion. I'll come back to that. He says the angels in heaven don't marry. But angels are always referred to in the masculine. And you say, well, that's just a figure of speech. No. Study carefully Genesis 19. What the homosexuals of that city wanted Lot to deliver his guests.
Yep, exactly.
So they dropped down. I have to get more graphic than that. Now, in contrast to these things, when we run into demons in the New Testament, they're very different. They seem to be powerless except to the extent they can indwell someone. They apparently always seek embodiment. That's why they petitioned to go into the swine and all that in Gadara. You know the story. Jesus said, for in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God. He's referring to believers. In the resurrection, they neither marry or given in marriage, but are as angels of God in heaven. Meaning, what he means by that is they are immortal. Someone that is mortal needs to procreate. Someone that's immortal doesn't procreate. That's his point. Now, he doesn't say, he's talking about the angels that are in heaven, the ones that are well behaved. I personally would not put any limitations on the technology available to an angel that's bent on mischief. That's my real point, I think. The word habitation, I've covered this before in the Alcatarian, refers to the body as a dwelling place for the spirit. It occurs only twice. In Jude 6, which the angels disrobed, and in 2 Corinthians 5:2, the heavenly body to which we as believers long to be clothed in. And the word habitation in one place is the same as the word house in the other place. Well, let's back up a little bit and talk about warfare. When we were in Genesis 3, verse 15, we had God declaring war on Satan. He said, I'll put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. And he shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Everybody quotes this as the first link in the chain of prophecies about Jesus Christ. And that's where he gets the title, the seed of the woman. But many people miss that there's two seeds here. There's the seed of the woman, and there's the seed of the serpent. He later is called the red dragon in Revelation 12. He's the coming world leader, I call him. I don't like the Germanic Christ because it's too limiting. And he has a sidekick by the name of the false prophet. So with Satan and the coming world political leader and the false prophet at his side, you've got a satanic counterfeit of the Trinity. Everything Satan does is a counterfeit. And these are the forces behind the world today. And Daniel chapter 10 is your recommended study on the details of all of that. When you get to Daniel 2, and we have the famous event of Daniel 2 is by way of review. We have Babylon, Persia, Greece, then Rome in two phases. In Daniel chapter 7, it's laid out, same subject, different idioms, but again, we have those same empires. But we get to these, in Daniel 2, we have the iron mixed with clay, remember? There's all this speculation. We have, the head we know is gold, is Babylon, the silver is Persia, the brass is Greek, the legs are iron, but the feet are iron mixed with clay. What on earth is the clay? And I've taught this for 30 years before I realized Daniel explains who the clay is. And of course, the last two are in two phases of the same empire. But we know that we're heading for a world order, a world without borders. We talked about that a lot. The whole idea of these things are, and it's coming. Global government's happening for at least three reasons. The nuclear proliferation is part of it. You've got to have global governance. Terrorism is a worldwide thing. It knows no borders. But there's also the possibility that we're going to be unified in a world government for a cosmic threat. General MacArthur said that. Reagan said it 3 times in public speeches. Many people missed that. That one thing that unites this world will be a threat from the outside. But get back to this. What is the miry clay in Daniel 2? See, it's all in Aramaic, not Hebrew. From Daniel 2 to 7 is in the Gentile language of the day, the Aramaic, not the Hebrew. Miry clay is clay made from mire or dust. It's very brittle. When you get to Daniel chapter 2, verse 43, I remember I must have read this hundreds of times over 30 years and never noticed what it said. Shame on me. And Daniel's interpreting this vision. He says, whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Whoops. Wait a minute. What did he say? See, it's a person. The clay represents some kind of people. As miry clay, they, to switch it to a personal pronoun, shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. In order to mingle with the seed of men, they have to be something other than the seed of men.
That's true.
Or I've had this checked by experts. That's what the Hebrew requires. Whatever they are, they're not the seed of men. What are they? I don't know. Are they Nephilim? Possibly. Are they genetically engineered clones? Possibly. But whatever they are, they apparently are a political constituency that is substantial in the scheme of things here. Whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of man, but they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with the clay. And he goes on. Mingle themselves with the seed of man. Interesting phrase. See, there is going to be restraint. We all know about the restrainer being removed. The mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now hindereth will hinder until he be taken out of the way, and then shall the wicked one be revealed. That's this we often call him the Antichrist, whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power. Wow, all power and signs and lying wonders. Be prepared for this political leader to do miracles, powered by Satan. We're not ready for that. 2 Thessalonians 2 is where we're drawing from here. Where does the Antichrist come from? Everybody misses this. It's in Revelation 13. Wait a minute. In Revelation 11 is where he's first introduced in Revelation. Verse 7. And when they shall have finished, speaking of the two witnesses, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. That's, of course, the Antichrist finally kills 2 witnesses. Where does he come out of? Out of the abuso. In Revelation 17, the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition, and they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life. And he goes on. Because they received not the love of the truth that they might be saved, for this cause God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie, not a lie, the lie. Well, I want to just close with, then we'll get back to finishing up the last few verses of the chapter. We've done all this in the first 4 verses. I appreciate it. But what I want you to do tonight, when you get some time, I want you to read the 2nd Psalm, and I want you to diagram who's speaking. There are 3 people talking to each other. The Psalm opens up as follows. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. It goes on. You diagram this, you'll discover it's a discussion among the Trinity. Part of this is the Father, part of the Son, part of the Holy Spirit. And we take that little short psalm, diagram it, and figure out who's saying what to whom. But this is talking about what I consider the most absurd war imaginable. All wars are bad, of course. Some are justified, some aren't. But the most ridiculous war is this one that it's talking about. I can understand people not believing in God. I can understand people being disobedient to God. What I cannot imagine in my mind is the world knowingly taking up arms against God. But that's what's going to happen. Why do the heathen rage and people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together Against who? Against the Lord and his anointed. That's what the word Christ means. It's anointed one. Saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords. They're going to throw off the shackles of God? Really? The rest of the psalm deals with it. I invite you to go take a look at it. Let's get back to finish up the chapter. The rest of it is, God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was evil, only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And this, of course, the word is in repented is nacham, which is a Nephilim form, which describes anthropologically as God having suffered a heart-rendering disappointment. Literally, it speaks of taking a deep breath in extreme pain. That's what it really means. So you say God can't repent. You know, we use that word in a different sense. It's an anthropomorphism of how God felt. God was hurt. It grieved him at his heart. The Lord said, I will destroy man from whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But, important word, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Boy, are we grateful for that. Every one of us are a descendant of Noah. Did you know that? Of course, yeah, okay. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And perfect really means upright, if you will. But again, we talked about that. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. By the way, that verse also shreds the Sethite theory. No good guys. No one deserving. Just their king. God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Room shalt thou make in the ark, and shall pitch it within and without with pitch. Now the word ark here is tiba. It came down from the Latin arca, is where we get the word ark. It's a chest or coffer. The word for ark and the Ark of the Covenant is a different word in the Hebrew. But obviously it's what you and I would properly call a barge. It's not a boat, it's not powered, it's just a barge. But anyway, it's by the way, it's been studied like mad by naval architects. And the proportions are ideal, it turns out, strangely. I want you to notice now, and we'll talk about it more next time, thou shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. If you make a boat, where do you pitch the boat? Where do you put the waterproofing? Yeah, but this is on both sides, isn't it? Why do you suppose that's pitched within and without? I'm going to suggest to you, and we'll develop it next time as we get into the ark itself, that it's designed to preserve it. That ark, I believe, has been miraculously hidden, and it may be on the verge of being discovered. I don't think it's in what we call Mount Ararat, it's somewhere else, but that's another, we'll talk about that next time. But the point is, it's designed to be preserved, because I believe it's going to be discovered, and it's going to serve as a testimony to an unbelieving world in the coming judgment. Again, not a flood this time, but we'll see. God goes on to give him more details. He says, this is the fashion which thou shalt make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. For our purposes here, assume that a cubit is about 18 inches. It could be as large as 25 inches, but let's just read a 1.5 feet is an easy approximation for us. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. And a window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shall be set in the side thereof, with the lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. Don't picture a little square window. Picture a slot, like a transom, across the whole length of it. You follow me? To let air, light in and air and so on. That's the way it's generally rendered by most people who study this. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life, from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. And with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing, of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee, they shall be male and female. The fowls after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee, and keep them alive. Now we're going to discover the first 2 verses of the next chapter is going to amend that with an addition, because he's going to add 14. Because he's actually going to add a dozen more, because you can take the 2 and add 7 of each. There's going to be 7. There's 7 of each, 7 male, 7 female. You with me? For those that are clean. We'll talk about that next time. And thou shalt take unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. That sounds so glib. Can you imagine building something the size that's larger than of the Titanic in your front driveway and spend 120 years of having your neighbors make fun of you? They didn't know what rain was. There was no such thing as rain in those days. So we forget that. There was no rain. Rain came later. We'll take a quick look at the chapter 7 and then we'll tie it off here tonight. The Lord said unto Noah, this is the opening of the next chapter, come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast shalt thou take to thee by 7s, the male and his female. The beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by 7s, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of the earth. The question you're going to examine between now and next week is, how did Noah know what was clean and unclean? Those are definitions that don't show up until Moses under the law, which is generations later, right? So next time, we're talking about the flood of Noah. Was it local or was it really worldwide? Big debate. There are guys like Hugh Ross and others that don't believe in a universal flood. They claim to be Bible believers, but they have some word games they play. But there are people that don't believe it was a worldwide flood. I'll explain what we think and why when it comes. Was the ark big enough to hold all the animals required? We'll talk about that. But more importantly, perhaps, how is the ark relevant prophetically? God puts it on one of the highest mountains, so high in altitude they have to leave it there. It's too thin to live. So when they leave the ark, they go down. They can't cannibalize it to make cabins and stuff. It's on top of, 14,000 feet or wherever it is. I'm going to suggest that it has another role yet future. I want you for next time to read chapters 7, 8, and 9, because we'll try to take all 3 to make up a little for the time I took to hammer home this one. The angel view of Genesis 6. I'm trying to emphasize it only because you're going to discover that its understanding will be essential to understand what really happened in the book of Joshua, what really happened all through the scripture, and what Isaiah means when he talks about the Rephaim that they're not eligible for resurrection, and so forth. It pervades the whole scripture. And especially, you have no ability to understand what Jesus meant when he says, as the days of Noah were, so shall the days of the coming of the Son of Man be. What on earth did he mean? Let's stand for a closing word of prayer. Let's bow our hearts. Father, we do praise you. We thank you, Father, for your word. We thank you that you've seen fit to reveal to us not only what you've done, but what you're going to do. We thank you, Father, for your precious, precious word. We do pray, Father, that you would open our hearts and lives to your word. We pray, Father, that through your Holy Spirit, you'd instruct us, you'd highlight to us that which you'd have us carry away from these passages. But above all, Father, we would ask that you would reignite in each of us a new hunger, a new passion for your word, that we each might continue to grow in grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, that we each might be more fruitful stewards of the opportunities that are before us. We thank you, Father, as we commit ourselves into your hands without any reservation. In the name of Yeshua, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Now, this is an area that most people tend to relegate to the demented or incompetent or fringe type people. And yet the entertainment industry, of course, has picked up on this with the a crop circle thing called Signs, which many of you may have seen. And also Steven Spielberg did a mini-series called Taken, focusing on the abductions and so forth. And while these things are interesting entertainment, they are replete, of course, with all kinds of misinformation and legends and half-truths that get mingled with facts so that it's really just entertainment. But one of the things you and I have to face is what is the real reality here? Is this just a bunch of nonsense, a composite of hoaxes and pranks by various people through the years? Or is there something really going on? One of the things we want to explore a little tonight is, are the UFOs real? And if so, where are they from? What's their agenda? Are they friendly or hostile? And most important, what does the Bible say about them? So we're going to explore that tonight as we go forth on our exploration of UFOs and the strange term, the Nephilim. What is that all about? But before we start, since we are dealing with a very, very complicated area, an area where many of us have already formed opinions, let me remind you of there's a principle. According to Edmund Spencer, he articulated this: there's a principle which is a bar against all information. It's proof against all argument. And it's something which cannot fail to keep man in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is condemnation before investigation. So one of our challenges as we go into this very complicated topic is to set aside our prejudices and presuppositions, and let's see what we can find out. Now, the same idea is not only articulated by Edmund Spencer, but it also is in our collection of Proverbs by Solomon, who reminds us that he that answereth the matter before he heareth it, it is a folly and a shame unto him. So one of our challenges tonight is sort of set aside what we think we may have heard or what our basic prejudices are, and let's see what we can find out that might be new. Now, many of us, of course, have seen photographs, many of which are hoaxes, contrived, and so forth. There are many of these in the literature. I'm sure you've seen all kinds. The problem is that not all of them are. It may surprise you to learn that there are over 3,000 authenticated photographs in the classified community that are authenticated. So what's really going on here? See, the problem we have in researching this area is there is so much that's uncorroborated. There's a lot of deliberate disinformation, and certainly a lot of data which is unreliable. And the problem is, when you strip away the hoaxes and you strip away the nonsense and you set aside the uncorroborated, there still is too much to ignore that is substantiated, that involves multiple reliable witnesses, including multiple radar sightings. And radars generally don't have hallucinations. And this idea of being plotted simultaneously on multiple radars is something that should get our attention. And now, give you one example. Back on June 18th of 1997, there was a strange vehicle that appeared over Phoenix, Arizona. In fact, went over most of the state at about 30 miles an hour, which is very slow for an airborne vehicle. There were some that said they felt they could have hit it with a ball that seemed that close as it went over. And it created quite a stir. And on March 13th, there were sightings all the way from Casa Grande and Chandler, all the way up through the northern part of the state, Prescott and so forth. So it wasn't just a local phenomenon, and it created quite a stir. Now, the governor of Arizona made a big mistake by treating a press conference the following morning lightly, as humor. And it didn't go over very well because people were upset because they were getting stonewalled by the government. Even though there were denials by the Air Force, they saw the fighter jets sortie after them and so on. So it created quite a stir. It wasn't picked up in the national media. It was picked up, of course, substantially in the local media, that is in the state of Arizona. And one of the things that's strange about this is that it happened in March of of 1997. It didn't show up until June 18th. And for what's strange to me is not just the event that happened in March, but there was no word about it in the national media. But then for some reason, no obvious reason, on June 18th, it was on the front page of USA Today. That's where this picture came from. It was on the NBC, CBS, CNN, all the major networks had this brief comment about what happened. What was puzzling about it didn't happen on June 18th, it happened back in March. And I haven't been able to determine what triggered the news media to make it a big event at that time. It's one thing it does demonstrate is how the news is managed, because all the networks pick it up at the same time for no ostensible reason. But as we talk about these kinds of things, sooner or later, we have to focus on the Roswell incident. And many of you realize that approximately July 4th, a few days following maybe, some object, that's in 1947, some object landed near Roswell, New Mexico. And Sheriff George Wilcox contacted the Roswell Army Airfield regarding wreckage that was discovered on Max Brazel's ranch in that area. The Army seals off the area and confiscates everything that was there. And on the 8th of July, Colonel William Blanchard, who was commander of the 509th Bomb Group, that was our primary atomic bomb group in those days, he issued an official press release stating that the wreckage of a crashed disc had been recovered. Now, this press release went out early enough on July 8th to be picked up by 30 newspapers across the country. And so it is. And this is a snapshot of what it looks like. The RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region and so forth. And no details of flying disc are revealed, et cetera, et cetera. Except within hours, something very strange happened. A second press release, which had tried to rescind the first one, was issued from the office of Brigadier General Roger Ramey, who was commander of the 8th Air Force. He resides at Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas, which is about 400 miles away from the incident. But within hours, General Ramey issues a countermanding release, and he claimed that Colonel Blanchard and the officers of the 509th at Roswell had made an unbelievably foolish mistake that somehow they incorrectly identified a weather balloon and its radar reflector as the wreckage of a crashed disc. Now, frankly, everyone that heard this, that thought about it a little bit, realized that was just a very contrived cover story. And this press release that in effect hit the next day by General Ramey caused, it was in effect a denial, did not explain why they confiscated everything, why the whole subject has been classified to this day. And now what that really did, this absurd cover story, frankly, just fueled the 50 years, the intervening 50 years of conjectures and all kinds of anecdotal testimonies of people who were involved peripherally. All kinds of stories have been echoing throughout this half century that's transpired since July of 1947. And the stories typically maintain that there were 4 alien occupants of this disc, that 3 of them were dead, 1 was still alive. All these presumably were taken off to the Never land of military security, and there's all kinds of stories that are too preposterous to really accept, and yet it continues. The great mystery about, when I travel, one of the most often questions I get is, what really happened at Roswell? Well, we don't really know what happened at Roswell. It's been classified, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We do know something that happened 9 months after the Roswell incident. Al Gore was born. And it turns out he really was. The Roswell incident occurred nominally about July, the days following July 4th in 1947. His birthday is March 31st of 1948, and that makes it a cute quip because every audience has always seemed to enjoy that kind of a crack. And obviously, I'm not being serious. That there's a linkage, really. But in any case, There is one reason I want to dwell on this a little bit, because for 50 years, people have conjectured what really happened there. And the Air Force has contrived one thin cover story after another over the years, each one sillier than the first, each one easily refuted by anyone that does a little homework. So you wonder, why is this thing still classified? Several presidents and half a dozen congressmen have tried to crack the security surrounding Roswell to no avail. What could have happened there that is still to this day regarded as an item of national security? And now, interestingly enough, just in the last few months, there appears that we now have what some people would call the smoking gun. There is some tangible evidence that's finally emerged that there was a crash of some kind, and it did have victims of some sort. You see, when General Ramey at Fort Worth issued that cover story, the press was present, and many pictures were taken. And James Bond Johnson of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram was among them. And on July 8th, he took a photograph, which a number of the photographs happened to show General Ramey clutching a sheaf of papers in his hand that apparently was a communique to Washington, D.C. And he happened to have it in his hand while he was going through this explanation and demonstrating that this really was a weather balloon. They had some props there that they showed and so forth. Well, it turns out that was in July 47. Since 1947, we've made a lot of progress in digital imaging technology. And this sheaf of paper that was photographed was analyzed with a digital photo scanner and enlarged and enhanced the words printed on the folded piece of paper. And then using a program for digital enhancement and analysis, it's now been reported on Associated Press on November 22nd of the year 2002 that David Rudiak was able to identify several key phrases on that sheaf of paper that General Ramey was clutching during that press conference. There's a phrase, the victims of the wreck, and also the phrase, in the disk they will ship. Lots of other words that were hard to, more conjectural is what they said, but the point is, here's a communication in his hand going to Washington that speaks of victims of the wreck and speaks of a disk that they're going to ship, while he's covering the story that Colonel Blanchard was all mixed up. This is just a weather balloon. So finally, the UFO researchers have something tangible to go on, because up till now it's been a spooky thing. Let's shift a little bit from 47 to July 19th through the 26th, about a week. In 1952, I happen to remember this vividly because in June 30th of 1952, I was entering the United States Naval Academy. So I was a plebe, a plebe at Annapolis when this was in the papers and much talked about at the time. It turns out a number of UFOs harassed Washington National Airport, which in those days was the only airport there. We didn't have Dulles. This is before Dulles. And also Andrews Air Force Base, so badly they had to shut down the air traffic. And this went on and off and on for a week. And it was in the papers, because every time the Air Force would alert jets to investigate what these things were, they would disappear. As soon as the jets landed, they came back. And fiery objects overrun jets over Capitol in the Washington Post. These are headlines from that period. Now, one of the things there again, they never really explained it. They issued some cover stories, but the truth of the matter is they didn't know what it was, and it wasn't just an incident one night. It went off and on for a better part of a week. Again, it created a problem just in blocking all the phone traffic, because everybody's calling what's going on and so forth, and so something real was happening, because you're talking here multiple radars. This isn't some impressionable, unprofessional observer. This was the air controllers at the Washington National and Andrews Air Force Base, and never explained, at least not to the public. 1993. By the way, there are thousands of these things to select from. I've just picked a few that seem representative. Over in Mexico City in 1993, the population by the thousands were upset and disturbed by what went on. Seoul, South Korea, November 23rd of 1996, CNN and Reuters reported a huge cigar-shaped UFO that was televised for 10 minutes on national television. When we talk about witnesses, there's all kinds of people, many very reliable professionals that have contributed to this background, but the ones that you and I would tend to presume would be the most reputable, most trained, and most competent in this area would be our astronauts. You think they know something about it? Do you realize that 13 of them have gone on record of seeing UFOs while they were doing their missions? Ed Mitchell, Apollo 14, April 1996, and this was on Dateline NBC. He said, NASA is covering up what really happened at Roswell, New Mexico. See, this isn't just the presumption of some journalists or the tabloids at the checkout stands at market. These are serious people saying that something is being covered up. Astronaut Gordon Cooper has made many introductions. May 15th of 1963, he did the 22-orbit Mercury capsule. He saw a green UFO, which was also at the same time he saw it tracked by the radar in Australia. It corroborated this. And he's testified before the United Nations that UFOs are visiting this planet. And in May 1996, he said we are being visited by aliens. So he's spoken a lot about this, so much so that some people tend to write him off. James Lovell, Frank Borman, Gemini 7, December 1965. On the second orbit of their 2-week flight, they saw a UFO. Gemini Control presumed it was the stage of their own Titan booster, but they indicated that they had both the booster and the UFO in sight, so that doesn't quite jive. Walter Schirra, these are all familiar names to most of us. Mercury 8, 1968. He was the first guy to use the term Santa Claus to indicate UFOs are near the space capsule. And so this was about December, so everybody thought that this was just a cute quip, but it was a code word. And it was later, in 1979, Maurice Chatelain, the chief of NASA Communications, confirmed that the Santa Claus phrase was a prearranged code word to deal with the UFOs without alarming the public. And Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, these familiar names to you? Are these guys competent? On Apollo 11, July 21st, 1969, both apparently saw lights in and on a crater, and there are unconfirmed reports that there were other spacecraft there. Some of this is classified, gets classified quickly, so we're treading in dangerous ground. But they have said 2 large objects, we're watching them. And Armstrong is quoted in some reports of a CIA cover-up. Now those reports get squelched, of course, so it's hard to separate what was just urban legend and what really happened. But if you go to Ed White, James McDivitt, James Lovell, Borman, Schirra, Gordon Cooper, these guys have all reported UFOs. Neil Armstrong, Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin, Apollo 11, Ed Mitchell, Apollo 14, and on it goes. And one of the most interesting ones is John Blaha. He was a veteran of 5 space shuttle missions. He also was a relatively recent resident of the Russian Mir space station a few years ago. March 24th of 1989, an amateur radio operator picked up an intercept about that Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under observation. And very impressive to listen to that soundtrack and hear the familiar voice say these rather strange things. So UFOs, we could go on and on. The main point I'm trying to do at this point is just indicate there are some people that you would consider competent and reliable in multiple that are reporting these things are real. And I would not attribute all of these to hallucinations or being impressionable or what have you. In fact, if you start looking into this area as an area of research, you'll find it extremely difficult because there are 6,000 professional publications in English alone that deal with this. There are 2,200 foreign publications, 1,350 UFO-related periodicals. And some of these, if you look at the books in the library, there are over 700 books that deal with UFOs just in the period from the 17th century to the First World War. Excuse me, the Second World War, from 1650 to 1945. There are over 300 books prior to the 17th century that deal with UFOs in the ancient times. So what on earth is this all about? You know, they've done polls. Do you realize that 57% of Americans, according to the polls, believe in UFOs? That doesn't make them real, but it says there's some phenomenology that must be real, even if it's just perceptions. 15% of Americans believe they have seen a UFO. How many of you in the audience have seen a UFO at one time? Okay, we're not going to take names. I just go, oh, good, okay. Here's the shocking one. This blew me away when I first read into it. Somewhere between 1 and 3.
Okay, more to going on in Ukraine than we knew, Diane. Wow, I never knew that.
%, various polls agree. Somewhere between 1 and 3% of Americans claim that they have had an abduction experience. That's over 5 million people, or in that neighborhood. Not a few thousand deranged people, not a few, disaffected. This is. We'll talk a little more about this. This is a very, very disturbing phenomenon in the counseling profession. Now, part of the problem of the UFOs is they have some paradoxical behavior. On the one hand, they're seen by multiple competent witnesses. They are plotted on radar, sometimes multiple radars simultaneously. They leave tangible traces on the ground, sometimes radiation, evidence of burning, and other things. So they are apparently real in the sense of being physical, on the one hand. There are photographs. Sometimes they show up on photographs, sometimes they don't. But here's the problem. While they seem to be tangible on the one hand, they exhibit behavior that can't possibly be physical. They can go in excess of 6,000 miles per hour without sonic boom. So what on earth does that mean? I'd like to know how they do that trick. They've been plotted making right-angle turns at over 16,000 miles an hour. That defies the laws of physics. That's now and perhaps the most disturbing thing of all, they appear to have the ability to materialize and dematerialize without a trace. One of the great mysteries of the UFOs isn't seeing them, is trying to figure out where are they when you don't see them. Some people say, well, they're from another galaxy. Most physicists will debunk that for lots of reasons. They seem to pose that way, but for lots of, if there are that many coming from another galaxy, you think you'd sense the traffic. We'll come to that with some more reasonable explanations, and you're going to discover the two top researchers in the last century, really, is Jacques Vallée, France, and J. Allen Hynek, the American. Now, J. Allen Hynek was head of astronomy at Cornell, and he set out to debunk this nonsense about UFOs, and he became one of the most ardent, competent, balanced researchers in the trade. J. Allen Hynek, he died a few years ago. Those of you that saw the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, whether you realize or not, saw J. Allen Hynek because he was in the crowd. I was on a board in those days with Alan Eder from Columbia, and they had him, as just a gesture, appear in some of the scenes, just as an extra. And the lacune of that piece of fiction, of course, was patterned after Jacques Vallée, the Frenchman. Both of these respected researchers came to the conclusion that they're not intergalactic. For lots of physics, there are a lot of physics rebuttals to that conjecture. They both argued that these things are demonic. Their term. They've written many, many books. You can check them out. These are not religious people. They're not people with any kind of personal agenda. But they came to the conclusion that these things, on the one hand, and by the way, we take for granted that we strip away the nonsense and the hoaxes, set that aside. There's tens of thousands of files you have to walk through. When you cut through all that, there's still a core group, a substantial core group of real events that need explanation. And so on the one hand, they exhibit physical properties on the one hand. On the other hand, they also violate all physical laws. And so the conclusion from that both J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée and others have come to is that they're hyperdimensional, that somehow they come from another dimension periodically. That causes us now to stand back a little bit and do a little tutorial on hyperspaces. And we're going to get into why we feel that the Bible is an authenticated message of extraterrestrial origin in the first place. So let's talk a little about hyperspaces. There are only two kinds of hyperspace, by the way, just a term for a space of more than 3 dimensions. You and I are familiar with two-dimensional space. It's called a scratch pad, or a photograph, or a piece of paper is a two-dimensional representation of something, typically. Three-dimensional space we're familiar with because we live in it. We also build models in 3 dimensions. We probably have a vague feeling of a 4th dimension called time. We don't get too comfortable with that unless you've done some special study, but we sort of acknowledge that reluctantly. Hyperspaces, frankly, is just the term used to study spaces of more than 3 dimensions. And we discover there's only 2 kinds of people that can really relate to hyperspaces. And that's mathematicians with special training and small children. Okay? Because they haven't, their prejudice has been blindfolded, so to speak. Now, the one book that is second to the Bible in its publication, all of us know the Bible is the most popular book in the history of man, but the second to that would be Euclid. And that's where most of us have been taught in school. And most of us, when we went to school, had trigonometry or plane geometry, same subject in a sense. We all know that a triangle, if you add up the angles of a triangle, adds up to how much? Anyone? 180 degrees, you betcha. So if I have a 30, 60, 90, it adds up 180. If I have a 45, 90, in fact, any triangle, if I add up the angles, it would add up to 180. Suppose, though, that my partner and I went out to a large field here, and we very carefully laid out with the transit a very large triangle, and when we got back with our figures, we added up the 3 angles, and it added up to more than 180 degrees. What would you conclude? That we've messed up, huh? No, what have we encountered? Anyone? The curvature of the earth, exactly. See, if you take a course in navigation, one of the things that you'll have to get some background in is spherical trigonometry, where you can have a triangle with 90 degrees in each corner. And so, see, when this little rule that we all learned, that a triangle, by implication, a plane triangle, a flat plane, adds up to 180 degrees, that's only true for a universe of 2 dimensions. So when you find that rule violated, it's a hint that you've encountered an additional dimension. And Dr. Einstein made history with that insight, because he was grappling, of course, with the nature of space, and he realized that length, mass, velocity, and time are relative to the velocity of the observer. In 1915, he generalized that, basically discovered that there's no distinction between time and space. And perhaps the most important thing from the general theory of relativity, we won't get in the math, of course, but is to realize that time itself is a physical property. You and I do not live in 3 dimensions. We live in at least 4. In fact, we now discover much more than that. But this idea that Einstein recognized as he grappled with the properties of space, that there's an additional dimension required, and he went to 4 dimensions to resolve the time issue. And his theory of relativity has been confirmed over 12 different methods to over 14 decimals. So it's no longer really a theory. It's well accepted basis in certain fields of science. So when we need to go beyond Euclid, which of course deals just with 3 dimensions. And in June 10th of 1854, the most important lecture in mathematics was given by George Riemann. He invented a thing called metric tensors. And that tool that he developed proves to be one of the most profound tools in advanced physics. And it took over 50 years, in fact, over 60 years, for Dr. Einstein to use that tool to develop his 4-dimensional space-time. And it's too bad that Einstein went to his death frustrated by not being able to solve certain problems, which if he had applied the technique going to 5 or more dimensions, they would have yielded.
Wow.
It took his successors to do that. Because in 1953, Kaluza and Klein both developed more than 4-dimensional models, which integrated light and supergravity in the model. In 1963, 10 years later, Yang and Mills both developed what they call Yang-Mills fields, which reconcile electromagnetic and nuclear forces. That physicists are pursuing some way to integrate all that we know about the physical universe into a common model. And in as early as 1984, and it's still a current conjecture because there's still problems with it, but scientists now generally believe that you and I live not in 3 or 4 or 5, but in 10 dimensions. And if you read in this area, you'll encounter superstrings and such, and we have briefing packs on this for those that want to get into it more. The point being, we need to understand that the 3 dimensions you and I are familiar with are not all there is. There's more. Let's imagine you and I can't move up. It'd be futile for me to try to communicate 4, 5, 6 dimensions to us to get together without having more mathematical tools. But what we can do is we can go the other way, and it may stretch our horizons here a little bit. You and I are three-dimensional beings. Let's imagine a two-dimensional world. That would be as like a large tabletop or a large flat plane. Now, let's imagine that two-dimensional world populated by two-dimensional people. You and I could come along and poke our finger through the plane of their existence. And what would they see? They would see a circle. They'd only see that which they could relate to in their universe. But if we as a three-dimensional being are putting our finger through that two-dimensional universe to the two-dimensional people in the two-dimensional universe, they would simply see a circle. Well, in fact, let's imagine that a ball fell through that two-dimensional universe. To the two-dimensional observer in that two-dimensional universe, he'd see from nothing to a point, it'd grow to a large circle, and then it would shrink back to a point and disappear. He wouldn't be able to relate to what happened because he doesn't have the insight of that third dimension. You with me so far?
Yeah.
Now, if you had some other kind of a shape, say a tumbling cube, it also would go through and it would take odd shapes as it passed through and then disappear. So one of the problems we have, suppose you and I are going to try to communicate a three-dimensional object to that two-dimensional world. How would we go about it? Well, there's a couple of ways. One would be to do what an architect would call projection. For example, if we had a cube, we could, in effect, shine a light that would give you a profile of that in 2 dimensions. You discover very quickly that that works, but it's not too useful in letting the two-dimensional person understand a three-dimensional cube. So there's another way you could do it. You could take a three-dimensional cube and you could unravel it. You could take it and just unfold it and lay it out, and that would be a way to communicate to this two-dimensional person what this three-dimensional cube is like. But you'd quickly discover as you tried to do that, his understanding is likely to be incomplete. Say, Chuck, what's all this got to do with anything? Well, let's talk about a 4-dimensional cube. That's called in mathematics a Hinton cube, and there are such things. The only place I know of it, it's called a tesseract. That's an unraveled Hinton cube. This is a 4-dimensional cube unraveled into 3 dimensions. You say,
Tesseract, they're always chasing that up on the Marvel movies. It's always the energy. A tesseract. Wow.
Gee, what good is that? There's only one place I know of where this has actually been used constructively. And amazingly enough, it was by Salvador Dali. I never realized what a sophisticated mathematician he was, but in his Corpus Christi painting, he actually has Christ on a 4-dimensional cube as a cross, and implying his mastery over time as well as space.
Oh, wow.
I imagine there's probably not one observer in 100 that really understands the sophistication that Salvador Dali was demonstrating by this piece of abstract art. But that's a Hinton cube or a tesseract, and that's the. But anyway, let's get back to hyperspaces then. The main point I want to get across: you and I live in 3 spatial dimensions, and that time is a physical property. That's very important to us in our ministry because we know that the Bible is an integrated message. 66 books penned by 40 guys over thousands of years. And yet it's integrated, and not just thematically. The very design of the text itself evidences integration. But what's mysterious about that integration also implies that the origin of that message is from outside the dimensionality of time because of the nature of its structure, its use of writing history before it happens, and so forth. So that's very important. Now, in particle physics, they talk about 10-dimensional strings as the nature of our universe. What fascinates me about that is that that's exactly what 2 Hebrew scholars back in the 13th century, 12th century, predicted just from their study of Genesis 1, is that we live in 10 dimensions, 4 dimensions are knowable, and 6 are not knowable, to use their jargon. But in any case, the suggestion, it's the only one that we've encountered that really can reconcile what we think we know, is that the UFOs apparently are hyperdimensional. They apparently can enter our dimensional under certain conditions for certain periods of time. And so let's see. Now, there's another aspect I'd like to touch upon about the whole UFO area. And getting back to the Roswell thing, why on Earth is Roswell still classified? Why can't the American public or the world public be informed about what's really going on? It's all tightly classified. Well, back in 1984, an event occurred that deserves some comment. In 1984, several documents emerged within the UFO community. One was a briefing address to President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower by Rear Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, and it was dated 18 November 1952. And there was also a special classified executive order signed by Harry S. Truman to the Secretary of Defense. In those days was James Forrestal. It was dated 24 September 1947. And his letter apparently authorized him to establish a board of suitably qualified persons to be answerable directly and only to the president. And the code name for this august group of appointees was Majestic 12. That was the code name. And these documents, all kinds of documents show up, CIA documents and other things, including this memo that signed by Harry Truman establishing this august group. Now, who were these group called Majestic 12? Well, one, of course, was Secretary of Defense James Forrestal, Rear Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, who was prominent in those days. Dr. Vannevar Bush was probably the most famous scientist of the period. General Nathan Twining, head of the Air Force, General Hoyt Vandenberg, General Robert Montague, and a number of civilians that you may not have heard of, Dr. Detlef Bronk, Dr. Jerome Hunsaker, Mr. Sidney Sowers, Mr. Gordon Gray, and Dr. Lloyd Berkner. And one guy we will talk about a little bit is Dr. Donald Menzel. And these were, when Forrestal died, by the way, in 1949, General Walker Smith replaced him. But these 12 people apparently were known in the classified community, it would seem, as Majestic 12. Well, these are interesting people. You see, first of these 12 people, the Secretary of Defense, of course, 3 of these people were the first 3 directors of the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. Actually, at the Director of Central Intelligence, that was the successor to the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which later became the CIA. 5 of these people were top scientists in aviation, research and development, and astronomy. All of these people held the highest security clearances anyway. Let's talk a little bit about Admiral Hillenkoetter. He was not, turns out, he was not simply a Navy man. And by the way, I want to mention something. A lot of people have heard about Majestic 12. And a lot of people also understand that it's been all debunked. But we're indebted to a very, very patient, thorough, diligent researcher by the name of Stanton Friedman, who published a book on this. And what he did, he developed dossiers, spent 20 years developing dossiers on each of the 12 to try to understand as much as he could about their personal lives. Rear Admiral Hillenkoetter was not simply a Navy man. He was the first director of the CIA, which was also established, interestingly enough, in September of 1947, just months after the Roswell incident. He retired from the U.S. Navy in 1957 and soon was appointed on the board of governors of NICAP, which was considered the most influential UFO organization in the 50s and 60s. Dr. Vannevar Bush, this is a name you probably heard. He's a world-renowned research scientist. He was the head of MIT between the 2 world wars and head of the Office of Scientific Research and Development. He led the development of the atomic bomb, the proximity fuse, radar, and 100 other high-tech systems with military applications. See, that's why he's so well known. He was also well known for establishing a policy of compartmentalization of classified work. It was previously the style in research labs to give people a lot of freedom of movement. And he was the one that saw the need for compartmentalizing, letting scientists have only the information they need to know so that they could control the
narrative
of information within the organization. So this whole idea of, we're going to talk about compartmentalization here shortly. Well, this whole MJ12 there are 2 kinds of people, those that have never heard of MJ12 and those that know that it's just it was just a hoax. You see, somebody noticed that apparently that the typewriter that was used to type the Truman Executive Order of 1947 was deemed a Smith Corona model and had not been manufactured until 1963. So you start to smell a hoax if that's true. The signature on the the signature on the memorandum had apparently been photocopied from an unrelated letter that Truman wrote to Vannevar Bush back, written in 1st of October of 1947. So you get the impression this thing was just a hoax. There are other anomalies that were noted and published in various media. So it quickly, within the UFO community, in just a few years, it was recognized by everyone that these documents were just fakes. And so most people either never heard of MG12 or they quote know, close quote, that it was just a very elaborate hoax. Until Friedman comes along. Stanton Friedman, who's a nuclear physicist, he spent over a decade painstakingly probing 15 libraries and archives, and he now has cast significant doubts about the doubters. He has refuted most of the documentation quibbles that were raised by the skeptics, but more importantly, he compiled detailed dossiers on each of the 12, and he's made some intriguing discoveries. See, by collecting the details on each one, some very interesting corroborations have emerged. And these are all published in his book, Top Secret Magic, in 1996. Let's take General Nathan Twining as an example. He had been scheduled to fly to Seattle on July 16th of 1947 to review the new B-50 bomber that was being built by Boeing at that time, and also to do some fishing with some old friends. So that was all scheduled for some time. Suddenly, General Twining canceled his Seattle trip and headed for New Mexico on July 7th. This is billed as just a routine inspection, but that doesn't jive with the apparent urgency to upset all these other long-laid plans for no apparent specific reason. It's also interesting that on July 9th, President Truman met with New Mexico Senator Chavez with no reason given. So you get the feeling behind these calendar entries there's something going on. Another interesting guy is Donald Menzel. He apparently, Friedman discovers, had led a double life. As a UFO debunker and a distinguished astronomer in public. He was a well-known astronomer. He also ran around poking holes at these UFO conjectures that were going on in those days. But it turns out he was also a linguist, a cryptographer, and a consultant to the National Security Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency for more than 30 years, and this was not known in the public. This is something Stanton found out by doing his homework. He held a top secret ultra clearance, and none of this was known to the general public. So it's interesting, whoever contrived this hoax had a lot of inside information somehow. Now, what's also provocative is Dr. Menzel, he gave some technical explanations disputing some UFO incidents that often were not scientifically defendable, especially for a guy like him who's a competent technologist. So it's strongly suggestive that he had a private agenda of disinformation as part of his job. So at this point, it may be useful to highlight, again, this is a little tutorial, which I'm going to call the anatomy of secrecy. How do you make something secret within the government or military community? Well, the first thing you can define the content of what's going on as secret or top secret or whatever level is justified by the content of the material. If there's a contract, the content of the work can be classified secret, top secret, what have you. But let's assume you're really serious about making this especially secure. The other thing you can do is called compartmentalization. You can compartmentalize the project. How do you do that? You make the existence of the contract classified. And these are usually in the intelligence community, and that's why they go by a nickname. They're called black programs from the intelligence side. These are great contracts to get because your competitors don't know they exist. So they're sole source, and they're considered attractive contracts. See, I have served as chairman of the board of 4 different publicly traded defense contractors. And several of these were companies that had their primary commitments in deeply classified work and obviously included compartmentalized programs. But I have to tell you, I was startled. I spent 30 years in the strategic community, both in the Department of Defense community directly and also, as I say, on boards and of publicly traded defense contractors. And I have to tell you, it was late in that 30-year career that I discovered, much to my amazement, there is another level of security, and that's where you make the existence of the customer classified. And I was in one of those projects, and it was a very, very strange meeting. We had our little company that was publicly traded, but not a large company, was competing for a particular procurement, and the head of that particular division asked me, as chairman of the board and controlling shareholder, and so on, to be present at the meeting, along with our banker. Vice president of First Interstate Bank was there, and as we in this conference room, 3 guys come in with business cards and give us their business cards, High Technology Research Associates or something like that, but quickly explain that that's just a cover, and we're not surprised. That's what's known as a cutout, a shell corporation that they're using for certain purposes, and they explained to us that we're down to 2 companies. Ours, which is a smaller company, and another large company. And one of the 2 companies is going to get, this is like on a Wednesday or Thursday. On Monday, one of these companies will phone and get the contract, and we're in the running. Okay, that's exciting. But then they explain that they're very embarrassed because we'll get a verbal okay on Monday if we win, but we'll have to start work right away to make the timing, and they won't be able to get paperwork to us for maybe 60 or 90 days. They're embarrassed, but it takes that long to get the kind of paperwork we need. And so the problem is we're going to have to start on a verbal go-ahead before we have paper. And the problem with that is that they looked at our financials, and we weren't that financially strong to undertake that kind of commitment. And so that's why they wanted a banker there. And so they said, well, could the bank extend? I think we had a credit line in those days of, I think, $4.5 million. It would take another $1.5 million to make us presentable for this purpose. And so they asked the bank could increase our credit line for $1.5 million. The banker very naturally said, you don't tell us who you are, and you won't tell us what it's all about. The answer is no. And so we're at a stalemate because, as I said, we wouldn't be qualified. And I turned to the vice president of First Interstate Bank and says, you people have my personal financials. In those days I had money. That's before I got in my project with the Russians. But anyway, they took me down. But the point is, in those days I had a net worth. I says, you have a net worth. If I guaranteed the incremental loan, would the bank willing to go along with this? And he said, I can't. He says he didn't have the authority, but we go downtown. He says that they'd probably go along with that. So I turned to the customer and says, if I can pull that off in the next 24 hours, would that suffice? And they said, sure. So that's exactly what we did. I went downtown the next morning to First Interstate Bank. We signed some papers, and I guaranteed an incremental $1.5 million on the existing $4.5 million loan on that Thursday or Friday, whatever it was. And that Monday, we did get a phone call, and we won this contract. And that was it would turned out to be the electronics for the B2. And it was 18 months later that whole project got transferred to Northrop. But prior to that, it was in an organization whose existence is classified. And so it startled me to discover that there's a whole procedure. There are cost recovery procedures, there are courts, there's all the necessary infrastructure to make this all work is in place. And it's all highly classified to protect even the existence of the customer. It's the 3rd level, if you will. You follow me?
Wow.
Well, one of the things that I want to, when you start talking about this with that kind of a structure, how do you also really protect something that you're trying to keep secret? And one of the things you can do is have an active disinformation strategy. You not only keep it secret, you publish things to keep people from understanding what it is, discredit it, or whatever else. And we did that, for example, in the Manhattan Project during World War II. The very existence of our atomic bomb project, the so-called Manhattan Project, was hidden under a whole bunch of other cover stories and pseudo projects. You went through certain doors, there were projects going on that really had nothing to do with anything. They were just a cover to hide what was really going on. Active disinformation. And one of the things I personally suspect is that's exactly what they did with MJ-12. It's very possible that they surface documents that have flaws in them, knowing that after a few months, few years, whatever, the diligence of researchers will discover that couldn't have been that typewriter, that really isn't Truman's signature, whatever. So everybody knows that MJ-12 is just a big hoax. What a perfect cover. Ask anybody that's in this community about MJ-12, and they'll shrug it off right away. Oh, that's that hoax that surfaced in the 80s. Really? What a perfect cover. And obviously, if I think it's real, I think it's continued. It obviously has gone under new names and so forth. But I suddenly began to realize that the debunking of MJ12 may be very well. There's a number of reasons I don't want to get into that caused me to suspect that that all was contrived. There have been some others like that, incidentally. So there's a continuing mystery. Why is somebody going to all this trouble to hide, for example, the Roswell stuff from after 56 years, whatever it is, 57 years? 2 presidents, 4 congressmen failed to penetrate the security surrounding the UFO-related issues. That's strange. By the way, a Canadian embassy inquiry was rebuffed in Washington, D.C. with the disclosure that the topic of UFOs enjoys a classification higher than our most secret warheads, the W-88s. They made an inquiry and they got turned down, but they made a mistake when they turned it down because they disclosed the fact that what they were after, which is some UFO information, was classified more highly than our weapon systems. Why? And by the way, just as we have Roswell in the United States, in England, they have the famous Rendlesham Forest incident. This is kind of interesting. On December 26th and 27th, the day after and then the next day of Christmas, in 1980, there's a forest that's right next to a U.S. air base and a Royal air base at Woodbridge in Suffolk, England. And in that forest, twice, 2 evenings in a row, a UFO landed. And it was seen 2 nights into succession. It was tracked on radar by many of the military sites around there. Many people were involved. They rolled out what they call light-alls. That's like a car-drawn trailer that has bright lights for various outdoor projects. They had that all set up when they landed. It was apparently scheduled somehow. And this was reported by Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt in a memo that was classified on both sides of the Atlantic, but a copy did get leaked out. And so just as we have our Roswell mystery, in England, they talk a lot about Rendlesham Forest. What really happened there? There are lots of people involved, military, enlisted and others. So out of that have come all kinds of stories. Many of them are too afraid to even talk about it. Others that share incidents, and they're very just as there are bizarre tales about Roswell, there's even more bizarre tales about Rendlesham Forest. Well, the good news is the UK government has announced last few months that the Rendlesham file is going to be released. They're moving towards a Freedom of Information Act kind of posture, and apparently the Rendlesham Forest files, which have only been seen by about 20 people up until the release, and we're moving into a day when some of these mysteries are going to be revealed. Now, another thing comes up when you talk about these topics are crop circles, and this might be a good chance for our TV people to change tapes if they want. So why don't let's take a 5-minute stretch break and let them collect themselves, and we'll pick up crop circles and some subsequent things following. Okay? Well, you can't talk about UFOs and that sort of thing without getting into the area of crop circles. And the recent movie Signs with Mel Gibson is an example of that. It was a amalgam of urban legends. They used corn stalks. None of the crop circles have used corn stalks, incidentally, but that's trivial. The real thing is, what about these crop circles? Many of us have heard that they're just developed by pranksters. Pranks with planks is the way most people regard them. And indeed, that probably covers many of them. I think most of you can have seen various patterns that occur in crops, not just in England, by the way, all over the world. They have showed up more and more, increasing. In fact, there are websites that just keep track of the various styles. They are in the thousands, by the way. These are just some representative shots of them. And various patterns, not all of them circular, by the way, but, and of course, many people associate these with UFOs. Many of these patterns have been observers claim have been UFOs seen over the fields the night before the crop circles are discovered, that sort of thing. So there seems to be, at least in the minds of many, an association between them. And but in 1991, 2 elderly artists, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley, They came forward and admitting that they had faked hundreds of these circles, and they demonstrated their technique using ropes and planks and tethers and so forth to do this. In fact, they did it under journalist supervision. In fact, in some of the TV specials, you can actually see time motion where they unveil how they pulled some of these off. And if that was just it, we would probably dismiss this as an incidental topic. But and it does appear, by the way, that there are many of these that have some form of craftsmanship that accounts for the thousands that appear throughout the world, not just in Britain, in the United States too. But let me tell you frankly, that doesn't explain them all. There's also a group of scientists that have been studying this quite rigorously and are startled with what they find on some of these circles. There are articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals that have established that not all of these things are pranks with planks. For example, biophysicist William C. Levengood, he's of the Finlandia Biophysical Laboratory in Michigan. He's examined plants and soils from 250 crop formations, randomly selected from 7 countries. And the samples and the controls of the handling of those samples were provided by the Massachusetts-based BLT research team directed by Nancy Talbot. Levengood, by the way, has published over 50 papers in scientific journals. He's documented numerous changes in the plants and the formations. For example, most dramatically, they found grossly elongated nodes, or like knuckles, along the stem that are apparently expulsion cavities caused by the heating of the internal moisture from exposure to intense bursts of radiation. The only way they can explain them. They've also taken seeds from the plants and germinated them in a lab. It showed significant alterations in growth as compared to the control samples. And this has been published in the International Journal of European Society of Plant Psychology back in '94. But it goes on and on. They find a brown glaze over some of the plants. It turns out it was pure iron that had been embedded in the plants while the iron was still molten. Tiny iron spheres were also found in the soil around those plants. This was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 1995. In 1999, a British investigator, Ronald Ashby, examined the glaze that we're talking about here through optical and scanning electron microscopes. And he determined that the intense heat had been involved, about 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, which of course would destroy the plants. And there are hundreds of plant and soil samples were collected from a 7-circle barley formation in Edmonton, Canada. The plants had both elongated nodes and expulsion cavities that we talked about, and the soils contained these peculiar iron spheres. And the controls showed that none of these, in other words, controlled plants that were not part of the circle did not have any of those changes. A mineralogist by the name of Sampath Iyengar, Technology and Materials Laboratory in California, examined specific heat-sensitive clay materials in these soils using X-ray diffraction and a scanning electron microscope. He discovered an increase in the degree of crystallinity in the circle minerals in the soil. Statistician Ravi Raghavan determined a 95% statistically significant confidence level in these findings. They have no idea what's causing it. It's clear this was not just some contrived prank for some of them. And so on it goes. Now, what was really astounding was the direct correlation between the node length increases in the plants and the increased crystallization in the soil minerals. What that implies is a common energy source for both effects. So somehow there was some very intense energy. This wasn't a couple of guys with planks and ropes playing games. And the scientists could not explain how this is possible, because the temperature required to alter the soil crystallinity would be between 1,500 and 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. And this, of course, would destroy the plants. So how did this happen? They don't know. But there are journals and there are scientists that are wrestling with the puzzles of the crop circles. Not the crop circles in general, those that turn out to be what we'll call real ones, not hoaxes. And that's the problem in any research area like this. You've got so much noise that it's hard to find the signal, if you will. Well, let's get to the real core of all of this. What's the biblical view? And we're going to talk a little bit about the days of Noah. You know, Jesus gave 4 disciples a confidential briefing on his second coming. And the 4 disciples came to him to inquire his return, and he detailed the precedent events that would occur prior to his second coming. And his answer to them, these 4 guys, is so important. It's recorded in 3 of the 4 Gospels: Matthew 24 and 25, Mark 13, and Luke 21 and 22. But he opens and closes that briefing with a repeated admonition: take heed that no man deceive you.
Okay, guys, he's already covered this in the first hour, so it's not looping, but he's already discussed this. So I'm going to switch to the Prophecy Club and finish with them. So hang on. Which one? This one there. That was fascinating, though. Oh, it's not loading. What's going on here? Hang on, guys. There it is.
They're doing here. They are trying. Welcome to the Prophecy Club. Our topic today is Russia, the Hoover Dam, volcanoes, and neon. Actually, it's very important. Okay, first of all, this is not a surprise. From Yahoo News, it says Russia says it's losing because Ukraine has experimental mutant troops created. I'm almost afraid to say these words because, let me take a second and talk about that. Yes, we did get a strike from YouTube. They claim that I said the V word. They claim that I'm talking about it. But the very first strike we got, I was talking about soldiers, S soldiers. And in that particular program, just here, Monday was supposed to be played Monday. It also had the soldiers with an S in front. Okay, S soldiers. I'm afraid to even say it. I appealed, saying I was not talking about their anti-V, but they denied it. Okay, I mean, the thing of it is they are the #1 platform. It's not a public utility, and they can do what they want. And so I have to abide by that because I want to reach as many people as I possibly can for Jesus. So yes, and that as a result, we cannot post for a week. So if you're watching this someplace else, maybe our app or something like that, then you'll understand. Now, here's my plan. I'm going to continue to make all of the programs that I normally make. And then after the, I guess you call it ban for a week, they won't let me post for a week. After that's lifted, then we'll be posting 2 programs a day to catch up. So it's still going to be all available. But it would be nice if you pray that we don't get any more strikes and that certainly they wouldn't take us off, because that would be a very big problem if they did. The lion's share of our response comes from them. And in case someone from YouTube is watching, thank you. I appreciate you. All right, now, I mean, I wouldn't do it the way you do it, but that's your choice. I understand that. So it says that Russia is, and I'm getting a little close to the line, even reading this article from Yahoo News. Russia says it's losing because Ukraine has experimental mutant troops. This is from Yahoo News, okay? Experimental mutant troops created in secret biolabs. That's exactly what the program was talking about that got the strike. So I'm very skittish to even read
Okay, guys, check this out. Here's a super soldier at the Ferguson riots. Hang on. I'll come back to this. I'm just showing this so you know there's such a thing as these mutant super soldiers. Yeah, there it is, loaded. Watch this, guys. Look at the size of him. Watch again. Look how big he is. Look how the normal size men only come up to his hip. Crazy, eh?
The headline from Yahoo News. Anyway, let's go on. So it says nearly 5 months into this senseless war against Ukraine, and I don't think it's senseless. From what I understand, it's putting down the bad guys, as in Russia is putting down the bad guys that are in Ukraine. I know there's some good guys in Ukraine too. I don't discount that. Anyway, let's go on. So it says Ukrainian troops were turned into superhuman killing machines during, quote, secret experiments in American-run biolabs. Testing of Ukrainian POWs' blood, they claimed, uncovered a range of diseases that suggest that they were secretly experimented on for military purposes. Now, the article goes on to make fun of this. I'm not making fun of it. I personally think that that's exactly what's going on. Why? Because when Jesus
Guys, when I was in the army, when you go through recruits, it's a 3-month course, and they make you go into a gas chamber and breathe in the gas, and you just do it because that's part of your training. But looking back on it, they could have put anything in that gas, and we stupidly let them do it. So I understand what he's saying with the Ukrainian soldiers being experimented on.
turns, the whole point of Armageddon is to bring all of his enemies down to attack Jerusalem. The Bible says that even though all of the world were to come down to attack Jerusalem, they will not be victorious, because Jesus was crucified outside the city, and for Armageddon, he brings all of the nation's armies, all of their, I have to choose my words carefully, all of their fallen ones,
I had to
all of their
refocus the
hybrids,
camera.
and they're doing everything in their can in their high technology area to make these, whatever you want to call them, horsemen, the Bible says, these mutants so strong that they can defeat Jesus. And Lucifer has lied to them enough to where he's got them actually believing that they're going to defeat Jesus. But the Bible says that he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And that's us. We do not, I talked about this Sunday, but of course you haven't seen that because I couldn't post it. When Jesus returns, the armies in heaven follow him on white horses. And then you and I are in tow behind that. We do not fight. The only ones that fight is Jesus and 2 angels that had the sickles. And he brings them down to the very place where his blood was spilled outside the city. And that's the Battle of Armageddon, where the blood rises at horse bridles by the space of 1,600 furlongs. So where his blood was spilled, he spilled their blood. Just like in the days of when they were requiring Pharaoh, was requiring all of the babies, the male babies, to be tossed into the Nile River. And that's when, of course, Moses was put into a little bulrush, it was a little small boat, and floated. And of course, the daughter of Pharaoh found the baby and brought Moses, and he was raised in Pharaoh's court. And it was a set by God. And then some 40, 50 years later, Pharaoh and all of that generation were drowned in the Red Sea. So they drowned God's people, the Jews, in the Nile. So God brought Pharaoh and all of his 600 chosen chariots and drowned them in the Red Sea. So basically, God was saying, okay, you drowned my people, I'm going to drown you.
Wow, good
And
pickup.
God does not tell this, but my
Good
guess is
pickup.
that if there were 600 people, 600 babies tossed in the Nile River, there was exactly 600 Pharaoh and his chariots and his men in the chariots drowned. In other words, it was probably a 1-for-1. And what they're trying to do here is trying to create a military so big, so powerful that it can defeat. Yes, he's telling them that they're going to try to defeat the Jews, but Jesus, that's when Jesus returns. That Lucifer is telling his people that he's going to be victorious. He's going to overcome Jesus and all of the angels. Now, never mind, Revelation 21 says, and I saw another angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold upon the dragon, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, bound him 1,000 years, cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loose a little season. So just one angel binds Lucifer, and then at the Battle of Armageddon, it says, and the beast and the false prophet were taken alive and cast into the lake, burning with fire and brimstone. And the remnant were slain by the sword of him that sat on the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. And that sword is the light sword, that's the morning star. Now, what they're doing here, they are trying. Lucifer's lied to them. He is the chief liar. He's lied to his own people, said, look at, we can build ourselves strong enough to where we can be victorious and we can take over the earth. That's what's really going on here. They're not just trying to help people get over heart disease. Come on. Well, they're not trying to help them with cancer or diabetes. No, that's all a big lie. What they're really doing is trying to make a fallen one or a demon or a reptilian, whatever you want to call them, a part demon, part human that is so strong, so powerful that it can beat Jesus. And of course, we know that doesn't happen. In the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, he blows that morning star down. It goes to the center of the earth, sets the foundations of the mountains on fire. The hills melt like wax at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. And as that morning star hits the tares, the sinners, the fallen ones, all of them, the only people that survive the day of the Lord are three. That would be Lucifer, he's tossed into the bottomless pit, and the beast and the false prophet, and the fourth group, those people that take the mark of the beast. All others fall to the ground, a pile of ashes and bones. All of them. If their name is not in the book of life, because he cleanses the earth of all sin. And as that morning star hits them, they fall to the ground, a pile of ashes and bones, destroying both body and soul. As it hits us, out of our belly flows rivers of living water. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, just that quickly, we get our glorified body, we get all of our mantles, our crowns, our rewards, everything we're going to get. It all happens in a moment. And when that morning star comes down, that is the judgment. That is the day of the Lord. And it happens in less than 24 hours. As that morning star hits the center, they're destroyed. And then 10 days later, that's the great white throne. When Jesus returns on the white horse with us in tow, that is the Bema seat or the judgment seat of, that's not right. Here, let me get my notes here. Judgment seat of Christ. That's right. Judgment seat of Christ. What they're trying to do here is to defeat Jesus. But see, we read the end of the book and they don't win. They don't win. Now, they're going to kill as many people that love Jesus as possibly can, but we are not going to fall. They overcame by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. I do not think we have to give our life in order to be an overcomer. But I do think we better be prepared to. And sad to say, or happy to say, depends on your attitude, happy to say, most of us will not make it to the end of the tribulation. Most of us will die before them. But you have to trust Jesus. He has the keys of hell and death. He decides who dies, how they die, when they die, and where they spend eternity, and how many of the rewards or crowns or mantles or whatever it might be that they get. He is the righteous judge. I believe it's Matthew 5:22 or 3 or something like that, says the Father judges no one, but is given all judgment under the Son. So Jesus is their problem, not the Father, not us, not the angels, except the two angels with the sickles. Two angels with the sickles slash the grapes. That's the reason the blood rises to the horse bridles by the space of 1,600 furlongs. So Russia says it's losing because Ukraine, this is the land of Moloch and Baal. This is where they come from. And probably, I do not know for sure, but I just heard a very credible person, even just today, said that the most massive underground tunnel system on the planet is underneath Ukraine. So these are, again, not all the Ukrainians. I understand there's some people over there in ministry, but they're probably the most evil people on the planet. And what I've been told is Russia's going in there trying to remove the pedophiles, not just the bio labs, the filth, but they're trying to clean up the world. This is, the internal revolution is the good guys trying to remove the bad guys. So let's go on. And we see the cruelty and barbarity which the military personnel of Ukraine behave. The crimes that they commit against the civilian population, I know that's not what the news says, okay? But you have to understand who owns ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox News, who owns them? Moloch and Baal worshippers. So they control what they say. Commit against the civilian population. Those monstrous crimes that they commit against prisoners of war confirm that this system for the control and creation of a cruel murder machine was implemented under the management of, that's right, the United States. In her found the blood of prophets and of saints and all that were slain upon the earth. So America is supposed to be the nation that is holding up the standard, holding up Christ, holding up righteousness, making other nations of the world toe the line. But because we fall, God says, because you failed in your mission, I blessed you more than any other nation. Because you failed in your mission, you have to be responsible. You have to answer for all of the other Christians that are killed because you fell. Let's go on to the next one. Natural News says, incompetent Western nations invoke doomsday retaliation from Russia. Okay, now think about this. The Moloch and the Baal worshippers don't have enough people to defeat the United States. They don't have enough military, or they don't have enough military might. They don't have enough missiles. But Russia does. And since the Molochs are now in control of America, what do they have to do? They have to get the Russians that do have the military might and the advanced weaponry to defeat America because God has seen to it. So what does he do? So the Moloch in America, I start to say a name, attacks Russia, and that's what's really going on. We talked about it in the last program. Gets Russia angry at America so that Russia takes out America, which is their goal anyway. They want to destroy as many Christians as possible, especially the Christian nation. So it goes on to say, deliberately trying to provoke Russia to launch nuclear strikes against Western cities. That's exactly what's going on. This will achieve the destruction of the USA and the Western civilization. Correct. Now, he goes on to say China's the problem. China, remember the angel spoke to Demetrius, said, then God will raise up China, Japan, and many of the nations. They'll go against the Russians. They'll defeat the Russians. They'll back the Russians at the gates of Paris where they sign a peace treaty. Now, I know that all of the news tries to make China out to be the bad guy. But China owns most of America, and most all of China's wealth comes from America, I don't think China truly is angry at America. I think China actually is on the side of America, just like the prophecies say. I know there's a lot of people saying differently. I disagree. I'll stick with Dimitri and what he said. And here's why. I know I've read this a lot of times, but if you want to understand what's really going on, you got to get a grip on this one. This is one of the last three messages that Dimitri Duduman was given before he was taken home to the Lord. April 1997. He said, so I knelt beside my bed to pray, as I do every night before I go to sleep. In other words, he had a prayer closet. After finishing my prayer, I opened my eyes, but I was no longer in my room. In other words, he was pulled into a vision. Instead, I found myself in a forest. I looked around to my right, and I saw a man dressed in white who pointed his finger and said, see and remember. It took me a while to find out what he was pointing at. He was pointing at a small bear who seemed half dead lying on the ground. That's where Russia was back in the 80s, perestroika and glasnost. As I continued to watch, the bear began to breathe deeper. With every passing minute, it seemed to revive itself. Well, that's what's happened to Russia over the last 20 years. She found massive amounts of oil. She's paid off her debts. She's become one of the largest oil exporters, and she's become now a pretty wealthy nation. And she doesn't have to pay big profits to all of the oil companies. Instead, Russia, Mother Russia herself, can get that money and pocket it where she wants, and she is spending it on military weapons. Russia has better weapons than we do. With every passing minute, it seemed to revive itself. And as I watched, it became angrier. Bingo. That's where we are right now. With what we're doing to Russia, we are making Russia angry. It then began to grow. Soon it was larger than the forest floor. I believe that's now. And as it grew larger, it continued to become angrier. As I read in the last program, if two guys are throwing rocks at each other, and there's a third person handing one of the guys the rocks, how many people are involved in that fight? Not two, three. If you're handing the rocks to the guy that's going to throw them, you're involved in the fight. So America is handing the military equipment off to the UK or to Ukraine to be able to fight the Russians. So America, de facto, is at war with Russia right now. We're already making Russia angry. They have already issued several warnings telling us we better back off. Then it began to grow. It said it was larger than the forest floor. As it grew larger, it continued to become angrier. Then it began to paw the ground, so that when it pawed the ground, the earth would shudder. The bear continued to devastate all that stood in his path until it found some men with sticks trying to fend it off. I believe that's NATO. Russia is going to run over America, especially, but also NATO. All of these NATO nations think that Russia's nothing, that we can defeat Russia so easy. They're wrong. They are wrong. When NATO goes against Russia, that's what it's going to be like. It's going to be like some men trying to fight a giant bear with sticks. By this time, the bear had grown so large, it simply crushed the men underfoot. That's what it's going to be like. When Russia attacks America in a surprise nuclear attack, when bombs land all over America in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, in 1 hour, so Greg Richards comes knock at a quote their verse here. It simply crushed the men underfoot and continued to rampage. So when Russia attacks America, it's not the final step. It's only an intermediary step. Then she goes over and destroys NATO, but she doesn't stop there. Finally, they back her to the gates of Paris where they sign a peace treaty. But they make the Russians their leader. And under the leadership of the Russians, all the world goes down to attack Israel. That's Ezekiel 38 and 39. And guess who's there? That's right, Russia. They make the Russians the leader. Then under the leadership of the Russians, all the world goes down to attack little Israel. Israel can't count on the help of the Jews in America, so she cries for Messiah. Jesus returns in the clouds and defeats the Russians and all the other armies, the kings of the east, everybody that God can get to come down to attack Israel. And that's the controversy of Israel. You can read that in the Bible. The controversy of Israel is essentially He brings all of his enemies. That means all of the fallen ones, all of the hybrids, the half man, half fallen one, all of the enhanced, I'm trying to choose my words, all of the enhanced ones, they bring everything they've got down on Israel because they're trying to attack and defeat Jesus. Jesus returns and defeats them in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trump. I was stunned by what I saw and asked the man standing beside me, "What does this mean?" The angel said, "Well, at first, they thought the great bear was dead." The man said, "But as it will begin to stir once again, they will consider it harmless. Suddenly, it will grow strong once more with purpose and violence." That's where we are right now. God will blind the eyes of the Americans. It doesn't say that, but it is saying that. God will blind the eyes of those who continue to trample on the sacrifice of Christ's blood. That's America. How many people have we seen whose great grandparents were Christians? Their parents were Christians, and yet they went off to a godless college, started smoking dope, shooting up, sex with everybody, and their life is in shambles. And today, they can't drive them to church with a bulldozer. Many people whose family heritage was Christian have walked away from Christ. The eyes of those continue to trample on the sacrifice of Christ's blood until the bear will strike swiftly. This day will catch them unprepared. It will be just as you saw. The man then said, "Tell my people that the days are numbered and the sentence has been passed," meaning America will fall. I'm going to say, but not if I have anything to do with it. And I know it's still going to fall, but I'm going to do my best to pray mercy, pray delays. And that's the reason I invite you again. Join Fast Gap. Now, Fast Track is praying for Prophecy Club, and that's good. We need you to do that too. Fast Gap is praying for America. Now, I know you're thinking, well, I don't know if I can fast. I can do all things through Christ that strengtheneth me. Either that verse is true or it's not. If it's true, then here's what happens. When you're fasting, asking God to do something, at least in my case and everybody else I've talked to, that when you're fasting for God, He takes the hunger pains away. To me, fasting is absolutely easy. I don't get hungry at all, not a problem, till the fast is over. So we fast midnight to 4 p.m., or midnight Tuesday to 4 p.m. on Wednesday. We do it every week. And I think we're coming up on 1,000 weeks for Fast Track. But you can join Fast Gap, same fast. What I do is every Tuesday evening, I'll send you an email directly from me to you. Yes, it'll have some typos in it. But it's the prayer that I'm asking everybody to pray. So we can all get on the same page, all pray the same prayer, the same fast, all the same time. And that is, trust me, brothers and sisters, that's extremely powerful. Tell my people the days have been numbered and the sentence has been passed. If my people will seek my face and walk in righteousness before me, I will open their eyes that they may see the danger approach. Okay, are we seeing the danger approach for Russia? No, not at all. Not at all. Not a problem. Russia's not a problem. Not a problem. China's the problem. No, China's not the problem. China's going to be on our side. See, we've been lied to by the father of lies. If they only look to the approaching danger, they too will be caught up and trampled underfoot. Only in righteousness will they find safety. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and you receive none of her plagues." Got to stop sinning, my brothers and sisters. All those little secret sins, God is watching. But even more important, the devil's watching. He knows. And he's coming after to kill, steal, and destroy. Now, let's go on to the next one. July 19th, Daily Mail. Explosion at Hoover Dam. Transformer catches fire at one of the country's largest hydroelectric facilities as mega drought sends reservoir to historic lows. One of the transformers at the power generating turbine house caught fire, and it's what is generating electricity. Now, This Hoover Dam, this is huge. Okay, so what did it? Just an accident? Or maybe it was on purpose. Maybe it was done by a man carrying something in there. Or maybe it was done by scalar wave. Again, they can destroy anything in the air, on the land, on the sea, under the sea, any place on the globe they want to. They don't even know where it comes from. It's not, it doesn't go A, B, C, D. Okay, it goes from A to D. It's interdimensional. They can't track it. They don't know where it comes from. It can show up and can start fires. It can cause droughts, great heat waves, big firestorms, or big dumps of snow. I mean, it's the perfect weapon. And they've had it since the early 60s. That I believe that's correct. Now, I don't know what causes this, but when you got 110 food facilities around the globe, all in the last 12 months, that have all had some kind of death or destruction, and now we have 4 different natural gas refineries or storage or something to do with natural gas, all in the last, 2 weeks? All of those were destroyed. I'm telling you, just like they spoke to Benjamin Fulford, we have ruled this planet for thousands of years and we'll destroy it rather than give it up. And so this is them destroying it. I can't say that we're in the tribulation yet. I believe we're very close. But a lot of the things that I see sounds just like the first 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It sounds like the first couple of years of the tribulation to me from what I see. Here's another one. In pictures, Anak Krakatau back to life again. 3 interruptions within 12 hours. So you're looking at pictures of this eruption. Now, the question is this scalar wave? Could scalar wave can do this? But you remember me 3 or 4 days ago, I was talking about CERN and how they have strangelets. Strangelets come out of this Large Hadron Collider when it does a collision. What is a strangelet? Well, at least according to one source, and I'm not an expert, I do not know that what I'm about to tell you is true, but according to them, they say that these can go down into the earth, they pass through everything, and they collect in the center of the earth. And when there's enough of them there, this is exactly what they cause. They cause volcanoes. What does Matthew 24 say? In those days, there'll be massive earthquakes in diverse places. Well, earthquake, the Bible doesn't talk about volcanoes, it talks about earthquakes. But volcanoes and earthquakes kind of go in hand in hand. Now, I don't know what caused this, and you don't either, but I think it's definitely one of the signs of the end. My guess is that it's not an accident. I think it's an on purpose. I think it's an on purpose because they're trying to destroy the world because they're getting mad because they're losing control. That's what's really going on. July 19th, blacklisted news. Headline, NEOM, Saudi Arabia to build the world's largest smart city in history. Now, I need to take a second and explain. One of the things I want to do when we find oil in Israel, I want to go to the Israeli government to say, look, can we work out a deal? Because according to the normal contract for oil exploration, the nation gets 1/8, and the oil drilling company gets 7/8 of the oil coming out of the ground. So I want to work a deal. I want you to give me a plot of land that I can bring Christians and Jews back from around the world. I want to buy an airline complete with mechanics and stewardess and hostess and servers or whatever you want to call them these days. Be able to fly Christians and Jews back from around the world. Ezekiel 38:11 says, in substance, the land of unwalled villages, to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without bars, having without walls, having neither bars nor gates. The desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gotten out of the nations, who have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land. I believe that what the Bible says in Ezekiel 39:28, I believe none of them there. That means that every single Jew on the planet, whether they know they're Jew or not, are all going to move back to Israel for the great end time battle. Every one of them. He's going to bring back the scattered Jews. And I want to be there to help. When they come back, they're going to need a place to stay. And that's where I come in. I want to build a land of unwalled villages, bring them in from around the world, which is why I'm telling you right up front that when things start happening, when we go over to Israel to drill this well in Israel, I don't know if I'll be posting every day or not. I will try to, because I think you'll probably find that real interesting what we're doing. Anyway, this is one of my goals. Now, the second goal is also to prepare a place for the woman to flee. You remember that Jesus spoke in Matthew 24 and says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, basically don't come down to pack, don't collect $200, don't pass go, get out of Dodge. I believe that where they're going to run is 216 miles straight south from Jerusalem down to the real Mount Sinai, which is in Saudi Arabia. And on the way down there, the Bible says, and he cast water out of his mouth, as it might cause the woman to be carried away of the flood. And the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed up the water which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman. And he went to make war with the remnant of the sea to keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Meaning, when they leave Israel, when they leave Jerusalem, when they see the Antichrist set on the Ark of the Covenant, that's the abomination of desolation. When they see that, no one's going to see that and recognize that, are those that are Christians, that have read Matthew 24 and recognize it. When they see that, they're going to run straight south, 216 miles. But on the way, there is a great flood released by the devil, tries to drown them in one of those ravines down there, but the earth opens up, swallows up the flood with the dragon cast out of his mouth. But they're going to get by that. And the Bible says that they are specifically protected for the last 3.5 years. Well, that's another thing I want to do is go down to Saudi Arabia and start building a place for the woman to flee. In other words, we'll get thousands, hopefully thousands of Christians pouring out of Jerusalem when they see the Antichrist set on the Ark of the Covenant. And they're going to need a place to stay. So this is one of the things I want to do is get down there and help build this. But now I've had this goal for, I don't know, 20 years.
Guys, good intention, but that's fantasy. There's no way Saudi Arabia is going to let you build a Christian Jewish community under Mount Sinai. That's just fantasy.
But this is very interesting because this article is about to say that Saudi Arabia is spending at least $500 billion building a city. And I think what's going to be moving in them is Christians leaving Jerusalem. So let's read it. It says MBS.
Wow, I'm pretty sure if you got a Bible in America, in Saudi Arabia, it's a death penalty. I'll look it up on Google. Hang on.
And that is the Prince of Saudi Arabia.
Is there a death penalty in Saudi Arabia for having the Bible? Saudi Arabia's new law imposes death sentence for Bible smugglers. So there you go. This guy's in fantasy land here.
It's turning an expensive desert the size of Belgium into a high-tech city region known as Neom. Starting with a budget of $500 million, MBS builds Neom as a showpiece that will transform Saudi's economy and serve as a test bed for technologies that could revolutionize daily life. It goes on to say it's going to have elevators that fly through the sky, an urban spaceport, buildings shaped like a double helix, falcons, outstretched wings, and a flower in bloom. It will soon be home to millions of people. See, they're building it. I don't understand. They're building it for Christians that are going to leave Jerusalem, in my opinion. It'll soon home.
Man, how does he come up with that? Saudi Arabia is spending $500 billion on a smart city for the Christians coming out of Israel. Man, I know God's powerful, but that's not going to happen. That's ridiculous.
Millions of people who will live in harmony with the environment, relying on desalination plants and a fully renewable electric grid. They'll benefit from cutting-edge infrastructure and a regulatory system designed expressly to foster new ideas, as long as those people don't do wrong, something he didn't want done. Final article. By the way, I normally don't have anything to do with this website. I get sent a lot of things from this website, but the name of it offends me. I don't let those kind of words come out of my mouth. I don't do it. And so for them to make their website, if you're watching, ASHTF, if you're watching.
He sort of got the right. I agree with him here, sort of. Yeah, that's not a nice name for your channel, SHTF. I agree with him here.
Change the name of your website.
Yep.
If you want me to read it, change the name of your website. It's offensive. It's offensive to us that is trying to be Christians, trying to walk a clean life. It's offensive. Change it. Nevertheless,
I agree.
this one time I will post one of their articles, and this will be the first, last, and only time. That is, till they change the name of their website. Headline: another massive fire at a farm supply store that sells animal feed and fertilizer. I'm telling you, there is an attempt to kill people because that's what Moloch does. He kills people. I can't prove what I'm about to say, but I believe probably back before the days of the Pharaoh, way back there, the devil went to some powerful people and said, you want to be rich. You want to be powerful. You want to rule the world. I will give you all of that, but we got to work out a deal. I'll give you what you want if you give me what I want. And probably they said, okay, deal. Yeah, deal. I'll take it. You're going to give me wealth and fame and fortune, let me rule the world? Yeah, deal. Well, but they didn't understand this was the other side of the deal. Okay, in return, you have to worship me. And the worship me means you have to kill people, eat people, drink their blood in sacrifices to me.
That's true.
And that's Moloch. That's Moloch and Baal. That's what they do. So the more people they can kill, the better. So if they can kill a bunch of people by killing off these animals, by taking away their food supply, by burning wheat fields, they'll do it. If they can shut off their electricity, their gas, if they can burn their homes, and that's what they're doing. We've ruled this planet for thousands of years. We'll destroy it rather than give it up. So that's what's really going on here. And if you're thinking about getting gold or silver, we're going to send you to cornerstoneassetmetals.com.
Okay, guys, now he's going into the commercial side of his channel, so I'll bail out now. I thought Chuck Missler was very informative. I really enjoyed that. Okay, guys, Mike from around the world tomorrow, and then I might show another Paul Begley video. 5 apocalyptic signs happened today. It was 2 or 3 days ago. So I might do a Paul Begley with Mike from around the world. We know we don't trust Paul Begley, but sometimes if you don't, yeah, sometimes you can hear what he's got to say. Anyway, guys, God bless.